Chapter 579. Li Yunyang's words immediately caused Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin to involuntarily look up at the sky. They saw that at this time, the bright moon that had originally been hanging high in the sky had disappeared. No one knew when the sky had gathered with a thick layer of dark clouds. Go to the net. 7 km. Lightning flashed in the clouds as if being attracted by the powerful Jinshin power of Su Ling, and the terrifying heavenly thunder was brewing. Cultivators were huge bodies of energy. Usually they carefully hid their energy in their meridians, 5 internal organs, 3 danshans and Niden, for fear of attracting the attention of heavenly thunder. But at this time, all the power of Su Ling's Jinshin had been released. It was like a super criminal who had committed a lot of crimes and was swaggering in front of the police station. It would be strange if it didn't attract heavenly thunder. However, it often took a long time for heavenly thunder to strike. It was as if heaven was also looking at the world with cold eyes, as if it wanted to see if he wanted to challenge the power of heaven. If this person had the intention to repent, the heavenly thunder would slowly dissipate. This was the so-called heaven has the virtue of caring for all living things. However, Li Yundong didn't want the heavenly thunder to dissipate. He wanted to use his own strength to draw it down and use its power to fight against Su Ling. But Zi Yuan knew that it was really dangerous to attract heavenly thunder. If he was careless, he would be struck into ashes by heavenly thunder. Zi Yuan was shocked and said, "Are you sure? It's not a joke to attract heavenly thunder. What if it goes astray? What if you can't control it and the heavenly thunder hits you? You should know that this is not the heavenly thunder attracted by your strength. This is the heavenly thunder attracted by the power of Jinshin. Its power is far above the heavenly thunder you have attracted before. Can you control it?" Li Yundong gritted his teeth and said, "If I don't try, I'll die." Zhou Qin suddenly said, "Master, why don't you hold him back? I'll take the Medicine King tripod when he's not paying attention and then we'll leave. What do you think?" Li Yundong immediately shook his head and said, "Don't joke. Su Ling can come here after hearing the news. What about those Jinshin masters who got the news? Just now I was hoping that they might not come, but now, I absolutely don't believe that they are not around. If you make a move, I guarantee that they will catch up with you within a few kilometers. At that time even I won't be able to save you." Zhou Qin was shocked and looked around in horror. What should we do? If there really are other golden body experts, then why didn't they make a move? Li Yundong's face darkened. I don't know. He could only take it one step at a time. Let's deal with Su Ling first. Protect me, I'm going to attract the heavenly thunder. As he spoke, he immediately pinched his fingers together and recited in a low voice, "The divine thunder, the cardinal of heaven and earth, the 3 realms and 9 earths, are under my command." As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, there was a muffled bang in the lower dantian of his lower abdomen, as if a thunderbolt had exploded in his body. Then as he took a breath, the sky immediately followed with a loud crack as if it was echoing him. Chris looked at Li Yundong coyly. Although she didn't know why the heavenly thunder was bursting at this time, she vaguely felt that an extremely terrible force was about to descend. This force seemed to tear the sky and destroy the earth. At this time, Li Yundong's whole body was surrounded by a white qi. As he breathed, it seemed that the wind and clouds were swirling around him, and there was a huge and inexplicable force surrounding him. This was exactly what was said in Wang Shurchen praying to Ba Duanjin. With this qi, heaven and earth will change constantly. Man is the spirit of all things. With this qi he can feel heaven and earth, move ghosts and gods, breathe in wind, cloud, thunder and rain and go everywhere. At this time, Su Ling also felt that a terrible force was about to descend. He looked down and saw that Li Yundong was using the 5 Thunder Jade method. Although he was a Jinshin master, he couldn't help but be shocked. Whose disciple is this little bastard? How could the Mahamudra of Buddhism be so powerful, and the thunder magic of Taoism be so powerful? Su Ling's face changed. He said sternly, "You want to attract the heavenly thunder to strike me? Dream on." After that, he waved his hand at the Medicine King tripod, ready to escape with the Medicine King tripod and the Diuan Jindan. Heavenly thunder was the nemesis of all cultivators. Even a terrifying Jinshin master like Su Ling was no exception. But at this time, Li Yundong couldn't wait any longer. He suddenly pointed at Su Ling and shouted. Zhenqi rushed out of his whole body, and the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head was opened. A stream of white qi rushed straight into the sky. Suddenly there was a loud bang in the sky. The heavenly thunder was attracted by Li Yundong and immediately poured out like a flood from the floodgates. Li Yundong felt as if he was riding a terrifying monster. Although he was holding the reins, he was pulled by this huge force out of control. Fortunately, Su Ling's Jinshin had not returned to his body at this time. Such a powerful energy body was like a huge magnet, sucking in the heavenly thunder and causing it to involuntarily strike him. Su Ling was shocked, and his body was instantly drowned by the heavenly thunder. When Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin saw the heavenly thunder hit Su Ling's yang spirit fiercely, they were immediately overjoyed. But before they could cheer, they were shocked to find that after the heavenly thunder, the golden light around Su Ling's body had dimmed a lot, but he was still standing as steady as a mountain. Su Ling hadn't expected that this heavenly thunder would not be as terrifying as he had imagined. For a moment he felt a kind of ecstasy after surviving a disaster. He couldn't help laughing wildly and said, "Heavenly thunder is just as it can't kill me. Haha, if you have the ability, let's have another heavenly thunder." At this time, Su Chan and the others looked at Su Ling in fear and despair. The little girl said in a trembling voice, "Even the heavenly thunder can't kill him?" After Li Yundong had attracted a heavenly thunder, even though his aura was strong, he couldn't help but be a little breathless. He gritted his teeth and said, "Damn it, I was too impatient." The power of the heavenly thunder was far from reaching its peak before it struck down. Zhou Qin's eyes were filled with horror as she said, "Can you strike him again?" Ziyuan shook her head, resigned to her fate. She sighed in a low voice and said desperately, "It's useless. The heavenly thunder is not something that can be attracted so easily. The Jinshin Master is too powerful. Even the heavenly thunder can't kill him." Li Yundong is almost at the end of his rope now. Although the fan of 7 treasures hasn't been used yet, it can't deal with this Jinshin Master. The most powerful magic of the 2 sects has been exhausted, but they can't do anything to Su Ling at all. "I don't believe it." Li Yundong was desperate, but he refused to accept his fate. He gritted his teeth and pinched his fingers again, preparing to attract the thunder again. But at this time, how could Su Ling let him attract the thunder? He pointed at Li Yundong and said with a ferocious smile, "Little B****, you still want to attract thunder? Be careful that I run over your head and attract the heavenly thunder to strike you too." This sentence immediately shocked Li Yundong, who was casting the spell. He suddenly froze and thought to himself, "Even if I'm not afraid of the heavenly thunder, what about Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin?" Su Ling saw that Li Yundong was hesitating for a moment, as if he had been frightened by him. He immediately laughed wildly and said, "Are you afraid? Little B****, you're not bad. At such a young age not only do you cultivate both Buddhism and Taoism, but you're also so powerful. Amazing. Even Wu Shouyang and Lu Huayang of the immortal and Buddhist sects were not as powerful as you. Boy, I'll give you another chance. If you take me as your disciple, I'll give you a Diuan Jin Dan. What do you think?" Li Yundong spat and said angrily, "Hurry up and kneel down for me. Call me master and I'll give you a mud ball. What do you think? However, even if you're willing to kneel, I won't accept it. You're a homicidal maniac. It's a shame for the Taoists to have such a scum like you. Be careful, God will take you to the West." Seeing that Li Yundong was still unwilling to admit defeat in such a desperate situation, Su Ling suddenly became furious and said with a ferocious smile, "God has eyes? Even heavenly thunder can't kill me. Do you still expect God to open his eyes?" As soon as Su Ling's voice fell, he suddenly heard a loud crack in the air, and an extremely terrifying thunderclap came. This clap of thunder nearly deafened everyone's ears. Chris was so shocked that she almost fainted. Her ears were buzzing and she almost lost her hearing. She saw a huge bolt of lightning suddenly fall from the sky, engulfing Su Ling in an instant once again. Boom! The power of this thunderbolt was far greater than before. Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin saw Su Ling's Jinshin Yang spirit being instantly shattered, turning into countless tiny golden spots of light floating in the air. After the thunder and lightning disappeared, they slowly gathered together and once again changed into the shape of the Jinshin Yang spirit. But this time, the golden light emitted by Su Ling's Yang spirit was so weak that it quickly went back into his body. As soon as Su Ling's Yang spirit returned to his body, he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. The hand holding the Diuan Jin Dan involuntarily loosened. The Medicine King tripod and the Diuan Jin Dan both fell into the air and continued to float without a master. When Su Kong heard Su Ling scream, he hurriedly rushed to him and anxiously transferred Jinchi to him. As soon as he moved, the 2 original Protector Celestial Emperors also disappeared. Su Kong whispered a few words to Su Ling. His Yang spirit looked at the Diuan Jin Dan and the Medicine King tripod unwillingly, as if he wanted to snatch them again. But at this time, Su Ling grabbed his hand, coughed up blood, and struggled to say in a low voice, there's thunder, a master of thunder retribution. Hurry up. With that, he didn't even look at the Dun Jindan and the Medicine King tripod. He pulled Su Kong away and turned into two beams of blue light. At this time, Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin were already dumbfounded. They stared dumbfoundedly at Su Ling and Su Kong, who were fleeing in panic, and couldn't help turning their heads to look at Li Yundong, who was also confused. Su Chan stammered, "Yundong. You're so powerful. You really beat a Jinshin master away." Li Yundong shook his head like a rattled drum and said, "It wasn't me. I didn't attract the thunder at all just now." Ziyuan was experienced and knowledgeable. She couldn't help but think of something even more terrifying. She looked around with a pale face and didn't say anything for a while. Zhou Qin didn't see the crux of the matter. She couldn't help but smile in surprise and say, "Anyway, master, this strong enemy has finally been driven away." Li Yundong also looked around and saw that Tiandu Peak, which had just been fighting fiercely, was now frighteningly quiet, like a huge cemetery. For a moment, Tiandu Peak was empty and dark. Only the sound of the wind could be heard, and there seemed to be no one anywhere. However, Li Yundong faintly felt that in the dark night, there seemed to be a hidden power that was more terrifying than Su Ling's peeping at him. After looking around vigilantly, Li Yundong waved at the Dun Jindan and the Medicine King tripod floating in the air. The three Dun Jindan, which had been repeatedly fought over by everyone and had changed owners several times, suddenly flew toward Li Yundong, and the Medicine King tripod followed closely behind. But just as the three Dun Jindan were about to fly in front of Li Yundong, a hole suddenly appeared in the ground not far from him, and three figures quickly jumped out of it. One of them laughed wildly and reached out to grab the Dun Jindan. Li Yundong was furious. Without even looking, all the Jinchi in his body poured out like a bomb, slapping toward the man like an avalanche. Chapter 580. After Li Yundong struck out with his palm, he realized that the person in front of him was Zheng Yuan, who had sneaked into the ground before. At this time, Zheng Yuan was not as dispirited and miserable as he had been when he had been seriously injured. Instead, his face was glowing and his magic power was much stronger than before. Watch net. 7KOM. When Zheng Yuan saw Li Yundong's palm coming at him, he immediately grabbed Alba, who was beside him, and used her as a shield to resist Li Yundong's fierce palm. Li Yundong was shocked and angry at the same time. If his palm hit her, Alba would immediately turn into a pile of meat paste, and he would also provoke divine punishment. Li Yundong immediately withdrew his palm, forcibly withdrawing his palm's strength. However, it was easier to exert force than to withdraw it. As soon as Li Yundong withdrew his force, Zheng Yuan immediately took out the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and shouted, "Li Yundong!" Li Yundong's body suddenly trembled, and in an instant, all the qi and blood in his body seemed to be frozen. His body swayed and he almost fell down. Although Li Yunyang had been frozen for less than a second, Zheng Yuan immediately recovered and seized the initiative again. He left Alba behind him with a grim smile, grabbed the Dun Jindan with one hand, and the Medicine King tripod with the other. Ziyuan and Zhou Qin, who were beside him, also reacted quickly at this time. Ziyuan shouted loudly, and the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk turned into a sharp blade, quickly cutting toward Zheng Yuan's wrist. Zhou Qin shook the Vulcan's whip, and the tip of the whip hit the bottom of the Medicine King tripod with a snap, whipping it high. At this time, Zheng Yuan had just grabbed the Dun Jindan in his palm, but he saw that the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk had already cut his wrist. The sharp rotating blade made his hair stand on end. At this time, Li Yundong had also come to his senses. He turned his hand and struck out with Ziyuan's palm. In the blink of an eye, the palm force hit Zheng Yuan's body. At this time, Zheng Yuan was no longer on guard. He roared wildly, and his body was suddenly blown away like a straw. His wrist was heavily cut by the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk. The pain made him involuntarily loosen his 5 fingers as he flew backward. 3 Dun Jindan fell out again and happened to fall less than 2 meters in front of Li Yundong. Zheng Yuan was sent flying 5 meters away by Li Yundong's palm. He spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at Li Yundong with hatred. He was extremely unwilling and thought to himself, "It seems that I can't get it today, but if I can't get it, you can't get it either." Thinking of this, a ferocious look flashed in Zheng Yuan's eyes. He pushed his hands forward, using almost all his strength to push out an extremely fierce palm wind. As the saying goes, a cornered beast will still fight. As the head of the Yin-Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, Zheng Yuan's decades of cultivation were not to be trifled with. At this time his desperate attack was really amazing. Seeing Zheng Yuan's palm coming toward him, Li Yundong snorted coldly, pinched a Mahamudra and blasted it at him. But as soon as he blasted out the Mahamudra, he saw Zheng Yuan's palm wind rushing over with 3 Diuan Jindan. Li Yundong was shocked and thought to himself, oh no. But Li Yundong's Mahamudra had already been blasted out, and it was too late to stop. He watched his Mahamudra and Zheng Yuan's palm collide. With a bang, the Diuan Jindan was the first to bear the brunt. Under the pressure of the two palms, it immediately broke and turned into a cloud of powder mist. This cloud of powder mist was surrounded by colorful light, enveloping Li Yundong, Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, Chris, Ding Nan and even Alba. Seeing that the Diuan Jindan had been destroyed, Li Yundong was about to lose his temper when he heard Ziyuan suddenly shout in a low voice, Li Yundong, take a deep breath. This is the divine chi of elixir. Take a deep breath. Li Yundong was stunned and subconsciously took a deep breath. Suddenly he inhaled a lot of the colorful powder mist, and its range shrank a little. At this time, Ziyuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin all reacted extremely quickly. The three of them took a deep breath and sucked in the pink mist, causing it to shrink by 2/3. The mist that had originally enveloped them became extremely thin. Ding Nan was not a fool. She immediately took a deep breath, but her cultivation was the lowest, so she inhaled the least. Chris understood Chinese. Although she didn't know why she was inhaling at this time, she had completely lost her subjective consciousness and subconsciously had a herd mentality. She also took a few deep breaths. Alba didn't understand Chinese at all. She just breathed normally and sucked in the last few remaining wisps of divine chi of elixir. Zheng Yuan didn't know that his palm had turned the 3 Diuan Jindans into a cloud of divine chi of elixir in an instant. Li Yundong and the others had taken everything. He thought that he had destroyed the Diuan Jindan, but he didn't get it, nor did he let Li Yundong take advantage of him. He laughed wildly and jumped up to grab the Medicine King tripod in the air. However, after Li Yundong finished inhaling the divine chi, he quickly made a few big handprints with his hands and slapped them heavily toward Zheng Yuan. At this time, Zheng Yuan's power had been greatly reduced, and he had forcibly tried to grab the Medicine King tripod. Seeing that these palms were coming toward him, he almost blocked all his angles and couldn't hide. He was filled with hatred and anger, so he simply slapped the Medicine King tripod and instantly sent it flying. He watched it disappear into the night in the blink of an eye. He was hit by Li Yundong's palms and fell to the ground with a scream. Zheng Yuan, today is the day you die. Li Yundong saw that Zheng Yuan was simply harming others without benefiting himself. He was extremely sinister and vicious. With a face full of anger, he was about to step forward and kill Zheng Yuan. However, Ding Nan grabbed Alba and shouted, Li Yundong, if you dare to kill him, I will kill Alba. Li Yundong was furious. He suddenly turned his head, and the Jinchi all over his body was like boiling magma. He said angrily, Ding Nan, do you want to die? Ding Nan was so frightened by Li Yundong's roar that she trembled all over. She grabbed Alba and kept retreating, trembling all over. She said in a trembling voice, You don't force me. Force you? No one is forcing you. It's you who are going further and further on the devil's way and sinking deeper and deeper. Li Yundong roared angrily. If I let him go today, more people will die because of him in the future. Don't you know that? Of course Ding Nan knew this, but she also knew that once she lost Zheng Yuan's protection, she would never be able to surpass Zhou Qin in this life. Ding Nan's heart ached as if it had been bitten by a poisonous snake. She smiled bitterly and said, I don't know anything. I only know that if you take one step closer she will die. Li Yundong was extremely angry. He took a step forward and was about to shout angrily when he suddenly felt the chi in his body surging like a tsunami. His meridians were in a mess as if they were rebelling. Li Yundong was shocked. He knew that he had inhaled the divine aura of elixir of Diuan Jindan, and at this time the medicine had already taken effect. Li Yundong's cultivation was the highest here. After absorbing the medicine, he had mobilized his Jinchi violently, so the medicine had taken effect the fastest. He only felt that for a moment his whole body was extremely hot, his head was dizzy, and his vision gradually blurred. Li Yundong was secretly horrified. He was afraid that once he fell, it would cause Zheng Yuan's ferocious counterattack. Once Ziyuan and Zhou Qin fought back, they would immediately be like him, and the medicine would take effect in an instant. Li Yundong's body was in turmoil, but he didn't show any of it on his face, like a calm lake. He gritted his teeth and forced his voice to sound normal. Hurry, get out of here. Don't let me see you again. Ding Nan couldn't believe that Li Yundong had really let her go. While dragging Alba, she looked at Li Yundong in horror and walked step by step toward Zheng Yuan. Although Zheng Yuan was seriously injured, he was like a centipede. He struggled to stand up. After glancing at Li Yundong with fear and hatred, he quickly took out a talisman from his arms, grabbed Ding Nan, and shouted in a low voice, "Let's go." Soon, a yellow light flashed and he, Ding Nan, and Alba immediately disappeared on the spot. Seeing Ding Nan escape with Alba, Zhou Qin asked loudly in shock and anger, "Master, why did you let her run away? Why didn't you bring Alba back?" But as soon as she finished speaking, she saw Li Yundong fall to the ground with a thud. His skin seemed to be on fire, turning a terrible blood-red color. The breath coming out of his sinuses was extremely hot, as if it could burn the air. Zhou Qin was shocked. She quickly squatted beside Li Yundong and asked in panic, "Master, what's wrong with you?" At this time, Ziyuan also noticed that something was wrong. She felt cold all over as if she had fallen into an ice cave. The qi in her body was uncontrollably rampaging. She said in a trembling voice, "Oh no, the medicine of Duanjindan has taken effect. Hurry up. Otherwise, once someone comes and we have no one to protect us, we will be in danger." Zhou Qin was shocked. She soon noticed that something was wrong in her body. Su Chan also exclaimed, "Ah, it's so cold. Why is it so cold?" At this time, Ziyuan's face was full of unbearable pain. She said in a trembling voice, "This is the Yuanin qi stimulated by the medicine. The Duanjindan is refining our Yuanqi. We have to meditate immediately, otherwise, we will die." As soon as she finished her words, she swayed a few times and fell to the ground. Although the cultivation of Zhou Qin and Su Chan was lower than that of Li Yundong and Ziyuan, and they were triggered later, the medicine took effect faster. They helped Li Yundong and Ziyuan up one by one. After taking a few steps, they also fell to the ground with a thud. Su Chan fell on the cold rock ground. In a daze, she saw a few golden lights suddenly flash in the sky, and a few Taoists appeared in front of them. One of them shouted in a rough voice, "Shixiang, we're late. All the Duanjindan have been robbed." Su Chan barely glanced at the man, only to see that he had a rough appearance, with tiger-like eyes and a lion-like nose. Next to him stood a middle-aged man of medium height, who looked extremely dignified. Next to these two people stood Zhang Tsuani of the Qingqing sect. Su Chan's heart suddenly skipped a beat and she thought to herself, "Damn it, the people of the Qingqing sect. Why did they come at this time? This is terrible." As soon as this thought flashed through her mind, Su Chan saw a black shadow flash by, and a familiar voice came, "Let's go." Su Chan was ecstatic. She knew that the owner of this voice was her master Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang quickly pinched her fingers, and the talisman in her hand instantly burned. Then the Taoists of the Qingqing sect shouted angrily, "Evildoer, where are you going?" As they said this, the powerful magical weapons and magic in their hands instantly smashed over. Su Chan saw that these powerful magical weapons were about to hit them, but she suddenly felt her body lighten. There was a flash of dazzling yellow light around her, and she, Li Yundong, and the others appeared in another place in an instant. Su Chan only felt that her eyelids were heavy. She struggled to open her eyes and look around, trying to find Ao Wushuang's figure. But when she found Ao Wushuang's figure, she saw another tall black shadow standing beside Ao Wushuang. This person stood in the moonlight, against the light, and his face could not be seen clearly. Only a pair of eyes were staring at Li Yundong, silent. Who is this person? After this thought flashed through Su Chan's mind, she fell into a deep coma. Chapter 581. When Ao Wushuang reappeared with Su Chan and the others, she was in her home in Shantang, Dongwu City. She stared at Su Chan, who was in a coma, and couldn't help but show a sense of love and pity. She gently bent down and used her hand to push away the messy hair on Su Chan's forehead. Her eyes were a little complicated. "Go to see the net." At this time, the man behind her took a slight step forward and observed Li Yundong with interest. Half of his face was illuminated by the moonlight, revealing a rather handsome man's face. It was Lu Yi, the former leader of the Fox Zen school. He said, "Why? Chanar finally has a chance to break through the realm of the six-tailed fox spirit. Aren't you happy for her?" Ao Wushuang tilted her face slightly and said in a cold voice, "What's there to be happy about? I'd rather she be safe for the rest of her life." Lu Yi snorted and said, "Be safe? How can it be so easy? When we fox spirits walk in the world, peace is an extravagant hope. Only by constantly strengthening ourselves can we ensure true peace." Ao Wushuang said coldly, "Are you satisfied now? Li Yundong has finally gotten the Duanjindan. Your big plan can finally be implemented." Lu Yi didn't say anything. He just stared at Li Yundong and didn't say anything for a long time. After a long time he sighed softly and said, "Sometimes I really envy this guy. He's young, smart, talented, and even rarer, he has all kinds of great opportunities. He has everything a cultivator desires. Look, he has only cultivated for more than half a year, and he's about to break through the Jinshin phase. Alas, this kind of cultivation speed is truly unprecedented since ancient times." Ao Wushuang snorted and said, "Wang Chongyang of the Chuanjin sect started cultivating at the age of 48 and became a great cultivator in a year. What do you mean?" Lu Yi said disapprovingly, "That's because Lu Dongbin and Han Zhongli have enlightened him. It's different." Ao Wushuang also looked at Li Yundong, and there was some emotion in her eyes. More than half a year ago this boy was as weak as an ant in front of her, but now he was about to break through the most important bottleneck of a cultivator, the Jinshin phase. Once Li Yundong broke through to the Jinshin phase, he would no longer be his match. His Mahamudra and all kinds of magical items would completely suppress him in all aspects. Ao Wushuang stared at him, and a thought suddenly came to her mind. Fortunately, this guy is not my enemy, nor is he the enemy of the Fox Zen school. Otherwise it would really be the end of the Fox Zen school. Ao Wushuang looked at him for a while and suddenly said, "Why didn't you make a move earlier? Wasn't he afraid that he wouldn't be able to get the Duyuan Jindan? When that golden body expert appeared, I thought you had given up and didn't plan to make a move." Lu Yi smiled and said, "The bald donkeys of Shiyuan Temple and Jinshan Temple are watching me every day. As long as I show my head, they will appear nearby. As long as I take action, they will definitely take action. And, do you think Su Ling is the only one nearby? As far as I can sense, there are no less than 5 golden body experts near Celestial Capital Peak. However, these guys are all narcissistic and arrogant. They think that they are the few great cultivators in the world. On the one hand, they disdain to fight for it, and on the other hand, they are afraid that once they make a move, others will take advantage of them." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "A group of hypocrites. If you want to snatch it, just snatch it. Why are you so cautious? This is what I like about Li Yundong. He's not like these hypocrites. They want to be whores and set up a chastity memorial." Lu Yi snorted and said, "If he was really decisive, he should have taken the Duyuan Jindan and run away as soon as possible, so that I wouldn't have to waste so much effort later." Ao Wushuang said coldly, "If he left, what about Chaner who came later? Do you think he is like you? Can he leave the people around him at any time?" Lu Yi was not angry in the face of Ao Wushuang's accusation. Instead, he raised his eyebrows and said, "A real man should not be so wishy-washy. However, this guy looks like a good and honest man, but he deliberately didn't put away the Duyuan Jindan. This is a sinister and vicious means, which caused the cultivators of all sects to fight and completely upset the situation. TSK not bad." Ao Wushuang snorted and said, "Bah, you are always scheming against others. Do you think that everyone in the world is scheming against others all the time like you?" Lu Yi snorted and said with a sneer, "If I don't scheme against others, others will scheme against me." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "So you even schemed against your own people. Aren't you afraid that something will go wrong in the end? Why didn't you take action earlier just now? What if Li Yundong was killed by Su Ling?" Lu Yi said disapprovingly, "How can the reincarnation of Wisdom King die so easily?" When Ao Wushuang heard the words reincarnation of Wisdom King, she suddenly frowned. She looked at Li Yundong with an extremely complicated look in her eyes. After a long time she suddenly asked, "When did you break through the 8-tailed realm?" The 8-tailed realm is equivalent to the primary stage of Thunder Retribution. Why didn't you just grab the Duyuan Jindan yourself just now? Why did you waste so much effort and beat around the bush?" Lu Yi chuckled and said meaningfully, "Do you think I'm the only Thunder Retribution master there?" Ao Wushuang was shocked. "Are there other Thunder Retribution masters?" Lu Yi sneered and said, "As far as I can tell, there are at least 3 Thunder Retribution masters nearby." Ao Wushuang was shocked. "What? 3 Thunder Retribution Masters? 3 of the 5 Thunder Retribution Masters have come? Why didn't they take action? Are they also arrogant?" Lu Yi laughed and said, "When the Thunder Retribution Masters fight, it will be a disaster. What's more, they are very afraid of each other, so they didn't come with their real bodies. They just spied on us with their divine senses." Ao Wushuang asked, "Do you know which 3? Lu Yi thought for a moment and said seriously, "One of them is from the Chuanjin sect. I can't tell which sect it is, but it doesn't seem to be the Chuanjin Dragon sect. I feel that the aura of this Thunder Retribution Master is very strange and unique. It should be a very remote branch of the Chuanjin sect. The other 2, seem to be from the Jingyi school. Ao Wushuang was shocked. 2 of them are from the Jingyi school? When did the Jingyi school have 2 Thunder Retribution Masters? Lu Yi nodded, his eyes full of vigilance. He said, one of them seems to be the aura of Zhang Tianshi, the leader of the sect. No one can fake that kind of vigorous Shenmen sect qi. I can't tell the other one from him. Ao Wushuang became more and more surprised. Isn't the leader of the Jingyi school in the Jinshin realm? When did he break through to the Thunder Retribution realm? Lu Yi said disapprovingly, since Wang Yuanshan betrayed the Jingyi school, Zhang Tianshi has been in seclusion. When he was in seclusion he was at the highest level of the Jinshin realm, the immortal Jinshin. 10 years have passed. Is it strange that his immortal Jinshin has broken through to the Thunder Retribution realm? Ao Wushuang thought about it and suddenly felt relieved. She thought to herself, even Lu Yi, an old fox, can break through from a 7-tailed fox to an 8-tailed fox in the past 9 years, let alone the leader of the Jingyi school. At this time Ao Wushuang sighed with emotion and said, when Renyuan Jindan appeared, I felt that the cultivation world had been stirred up by this Renyuan Jindan. All the major sects seemed to have woken up from hibernation in an instant. Now it seems that the real storm is yet to come. How many people have died because of the Diyuan Jindan this time? Lu Yi sneered and said, if they don't die, how can my plan be carried out? Ao Wushuang was silent for a long time. She came to Su Chan's side again and said in a cold voice, I'll say it for the last time. I will do what you ask me to do. However, if you dare to drag Chana in, I will die with you. Lu Yi smiled and said, as long as you do as I tell you, I promise that she will be fine. Humph, when the celestial fox appears, I'll see how long the major sects can maintain their prestige. As he said this, he smiled proudly and said, Li Yundong has gained a blessing in disguise. I didn't expect that the 3 Diyuan Jindans would benefit a few people. Even I didn't expect that the Diyuan Jindan could be taken like this. Wonderful, it's really wonderful. Now, as long as he passes the time limit and is given some time, the strength of the Fox Zen school will increase greatly, and my plan will go further. Ah. At this time Ao Wushuang's eyes fell on Chris, who was also unconscious. She suddenly said, what about this foreigner? She seems to have also absorbed the divine aura of elixir. Lu Ye's eyes flickered and he smiled. This foreigner is lucky to be able to absorb the divine aura of elixir. It's really fate. Ao Wushuang had also heard from Su Chan that Chris had chased after Li Yundong and wanted to be his disciple. She asked, do you think Li Yundong will accept her as his disciple? Lu Yi snorted and sneered contemptuously. Does she deserve to be his disciple? These Westerners, when they were still slash and burn farming, our ancestors had already begun to cultivate. When they were still creating words, Fuxi had already created the Book of Changes. Even now, these foreigners can't understand what was written more than 5,000 years ago. Do you expect them to understand cultivation? What a joke. Can they understand the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor? Can they understand what qi, blood, and meridians are? However, Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, that's not true. I heard from Su Chan that this girl seems to have some Chinese blood, and she is very yearning for Chinese culture. Lu Yi sneered and said, if I were Li Yundong, I wouldn't accept this foreigner as my disciple. In the 5,000 years of the Chinese cultivation world, no one has ever broken this rule. However, Ao Wushuang sneered and said, really? Why do I hear that many sects have developed abroad and have their own believers? There is even a saying in the cultivation world that there are masters overseas? Lu Yi said disapprovingly, humph, the birthplace of Chinese culture is the Central Plains. If there are no masters here, where can there be masters? What kind of masters can there be in those remote and barbarian lands? As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly frowned and looked out of the window. He said in a deep voice, the bald donkeys of Shiyuan Temple and Jinshan Temple are chasing after us again. I'll leave first. You can protect them later. This is a busy city. I believe these cultivators dare not act recklessly. After that, his figure flashed and he disappeared in an instant. At this time, on the distant Mount Wuhua, Zheng Yuan and Ding Nan had already returned to their cave residences. Alba, who had been kidnapped, also appeared next to them. Alba looked around in horror and despair. The cheerleader of the University of Pennsylvania had no idea what kind of fate awaited her. Even Ding Nan herself didn't know what kind of change she would usher in after the Battle of Tiandu Peak. Chapter 582. As soon as Zheng Yuan returned to the cave residence in Mount Wuhua, he suddenly knelt on the ground as if he had lost all his strength. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face turned frighteningly pale. He took out a medicine bottle from his arms, trembling all over, and swallowed almost all the pills in the bottle in one breath. Go to see. This was the 9 turns yang restoration pill, a life-saving elixir that Jing Yuan had kept for many years. As long as one was still breathing, taking this elixir would allow him to breathe again. After taking the elixir, Jing Yuan immediately sat down to meditate. Before he did so, he said to Ding Nan beside him, "Pinger, I'm going to meditate to recuperate. Protect me and stop anyone from disturbing me." At this time, the efficacy of the Diuan Jindan was also slowly taking effect. She only felt that her whole body was extremely cold, her head was heavy, her feet were light, and her head was dizzy. She subconsciously responded, but soon after Jing Yuan entered a meditative state, she staggered and leaned against the wall. Alba, who had been taken back, looked around in horror. She saw that she was in a stone room with several cabinets on the walls. There were all kinds of rare antiques on the cabinets, as well as some exquisite medicine bottles and jars. In the middle of the stone room, there was an altar against the wall. On the altar was a futon, and on the left and right sides of the futon were 2 incense burners. Sandalwood was burning in the incense burners, and an 8 diagrams was hanging on the futon. The whole place was filled with a mysterious and strange oriental atmosphere. Alba felt like she had just had a nightmare. She looked around stiffly and pinched her thigh hard, as if she would wake up from her nightmare after a sharp pain. She would return to the green lawn of the University of Pennsylvania and enjoy the happy and comfortable sunshine again. But reality was extremely cruel. Alba only felt a sharp pain in her thigh, but she was still in this demonic place. Alba thought about how her nightmare had begun since she had decided to come to Mount Huangshan with Chris and John. John had fallen into the abyss, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. She had even become a hostage and there was a language barrier. Her mobile phone had fallen in the panic. How could she escape and regain freedom when she was unfamiliar with this place? For a moment, Alba felt so sad that she almost burst into tears. But at this time, Ding Nan, who had already taken effect, suddenly fell to the ground with a thud. Alba was shocked. She looked back and was surprised to find that both Jing Yuan and Ding Nan had fallen into a coma. Alba could hardly believe her eyes. She carefully stood up and bowed, like a frightened deer trying to see if a beast was asleep. After carefully observing Jing Yuan and Ding Nan for a while, she finally determined that they had indeed fainted. At this time, Alba could not help but be ecstatic. Her heart beat faster for a moment, and she could not help but run out of the cave. As she ran, she was afraid that Jing Yuan and Ding Nan would suddenly wake up. If she was caught, she would inevitably be tortured, so she ran with ecstasy and looked back in horror. The reason why traditional Chinese medicine believed that fear injures the kidney, anger injures the liver, joy injures the heart, thinking injures the spleen, and sadness injures the lungs was that when people were most afraid, the blood flow in their bodies would instantly slow down, causing them to feel weak, cold, and even tremble. The human body's own small universe had a strong self-regulation function, so the kidneys would mobilize a large amount of essence qi that was usually stored in the kidneys. Sometimes, if a person's essence qi was mobilized too much, it would lead to death from essence exhaustion, and people would be scared to death. Similarly, when people were ecstatic, their blood would flow too fast in an instant, and their blood vessels would expand. The heart would suddenly bear a huge burden and pressure of blood transport, and suddenly deliver a large amount of blood in a short period of time. This would also cause the heart of the human body's middle dantian to lose a lot of heart qi, which would lead to extreme joy turns to sorrow. Alba was both happy and frightened. Her heart and kidneys suddenly suffered a great loss. Although she had no foundation in cultivation, this stimulation immediately aroused the medicinal effect of the divine qi of elixir. When she ran to the door of the cave, she suddenly fell to the ground without saying a word. After an unknown period of time, Alba woke up from her coma. After waking up, she looked around blankly for a while, but soon jumped up in fear. With this jump, Alba felt as if her whole body was full of strength. She didn't know that she had already inhaled the divine qi of the Diuan Jindan. Although it was only a little, it was enough to make her whole body undergo earth-shaking changes. The abundance of her essence, qi, and blood had far exceeded that of ordinary people. When people's qi and blood were vigorous, they would also become bolder. Alba glanced behind her and saw that Ding Nan was surrounded by colorful light, which was mysterious and strange. Zheng Yuan's head was constantly steaming with white qi, as if he was an immortal. Alba was stunned. She muttered to herself in horror and curiosity, "Why are these Chinese people so strange? For God's sake, they are so strong. How could they have been beaten so badly more than 100 years ago? Who can tell me why?" If Chinese people are so powerful, why haven't they unified the world? But Alba had no time to think about this question. She turned around and ran out. Zheng Yuan's cave residence was in the depths of Mount Wuhua, and he usually did not allow other disciples to come to his residence. In addition, he was suspicious by nature and had only accepted 2 disciples in his life. Therefore, no one stopped Alba in the cave residence at the back of the mountain, allowing her to run all the way out of the cave. But just as Alba was about to escape, Ding Nan slowly woke up from her meditation. After her Jinqi had been transformed by the divine qi of Panacea, the Niden in her body had condensed and become several times more powerful than before. She let out a long breath, which condensed and did not disperse. Like a sharp arrow, she sprayed it at the wall, but it did not disperse at all. Instead, with a thud, it sounded like an iron hammer hitting the wall. Ding Nan was startled by the sound and opened her eyes. But as soon as she did so, she found that Alba had disappeared from the cave. Shocked and furious, she immediately chased after her and flew into the air to look for Alba's figure from a high vantage point. Alba had not escaped for long before she was immediately found by Ding Nan. Ding Nan sneered and immediately chased after her. In the blink of an eye, she appeared beside Alba and sneered, "Where are you going?" When Alba saw Ding Nan suddenly appear, she was so scared that she trembled all over. The courage she had gathered just now suddenly collapsed and disappeared. She pleaded loudly, "Please, for God's sake, let me go. How much money do you want? I'll give it to you." Ding Nan had followed Zhou Qin to the upper class in the past, so she had specially practiced fluent English. As soon as Alba spoke, she frowned and replied in the same English, "Who wants your money?" Alba was overjoyed to see that Ding Nan's English was extremely fluent. She quickly begged again, "Oh my God, your English is so good. You are really a beautiful lady. Can you be merciful and let me go back? My parents and family will be very worried about me." Ding Nan's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but think of her parents, and for a moment she felt sorry for them. Seeing the hesitation in Ding Nan's eyes, Alba knew that she was a little soft-hearted, so she said, "If you let me go back, I won't tell anyone what I saw, including John's death and everything else. I will." This sentence immediately made Ding Nan vigilant. Suddenly it occurred to her that John had died, so to speak, by her own hand. Ding Nan had been cultivating for a period of time, and she also understood the rules of the cultivation world. That was, things that happened in the cultivation world should be solved within the cultivation world. Therefore, Zhou Qin would never report these things to the police. She would definitely come to make trouble for her in person. But once Alba told this matter, she would become a wanted criminal. At that time she would be wanted all over the world. How could she cultivate? She couldn't attack ordinary people, could she? As soon as Ding Nan thought of this, evil thoughts rose in her mind, and her eyes slowly became cold as she looked at Alba. Seeing that Ding Nan's eyes were getting colder and colder, Alba was frightened and subconsciously wanted to turn around and run away. However, Ding Nan sneered, reached out and grabbed her neck. She picked her up like a chicken and said, "Come back with me." Although Alba struggled desperately, how could she break free from Ding Nan's hands? The poor cheerleader was dragged back by Ding Nan like an animal. When she saw that she had returned to this dark and cold stone room, she suddenly burst into tears in despair. Although Ding Nan did not intend to let her go, seeing her crying like a pear blossom in the rain, she couldn't help saying, "Don't cry. I won't hurt you as long as you're obedient." Alba cried, "What did I do? Why won't you let me go? What did I do wrong?" At first, Ding Nan listened quietly, but when she heard Alba keep repeating these words, she finally couldn't help but roar loudly, "You're asking me? Who should I ask? What did I do wrong? Why did I end up like this, making the man I love hate me so much that he wants to kill me with his own hands? Answer me why." Alba was frightened by Ding Nan's roar. For a moment there were still tears on her face. She stared at her blankly, unable to speak. At this time, Zheng Yuan seemed to be alarmed by Ding Nan's roar and woke up from his meditation. Although his face was still gray, it was much better than before. After taking a deep breath, he said in a hoarse and tired voice, "Pinger, what happened? What did you shout just now?" Ding Nan forced a smile and said, "Master, are you awake?" "It's nothing. I was quarreling with this foreign girl. She wants to go back." "Go back?" Zheng Yuan snorted coldly. He glanced at Alba contemptuously and sneered. "She wants to leave now that she's here? Dream on." Zheng Yuan retracted his gaze and glanced at Ding Nan, only to find that Ding Nan's eyes were full of vitality, and her whole body was exuding an extremely powerful Yuanine qi. He was surprised and couldn't help saying, Pinga, your cultivation has increased greatly. Ding Nan naturally knew that it was because she had absorbed the spiritual qi of the elixir of life. She smiled flatteringly and said, "It's all thanks to you, master." "It's all thanks to me?" Jing Yuan was not a fool. He hadn't noticed the abnormality of the Diuanjin Dan being slapped into a mortal mist before, but at this time, Ding Nan's cultivation had suddenly soared, and she was about to reach the top level of the Yang spirit realm. If he still couldn't react to such a strange cultivation speed, it would be a waste of his cultivation. Shocked and angry, Zheng Yuan cried out involuntarily, "That cloud of smoke is the spiritual qi of the elixir of life? You also absorbed it?" Li Jiandong and the others also absorbed it. Ding Nan saw the shock, anger, and jealousy in Zheng Yuan's eyes. Her heart skipped a beat and she quickly knelt down and said in a trembling voice, "Master, I didn't mean to. At that time I just..." Zheng Yuan looked at Ding Nan in front of him with a gloomy expression. He was so jealous and hateful that he almost bled. He just wanted to drain all the blood in her body in an instant and then dig out all the spiritual qi in her body for his own enjoyment. However, the medicinal power of the Diuanjin Dan dissolved very quickly, and Ding Nan was a rare good furnace. Soon the medicinal power was completely dissolved. It was too late for him to do anything else. Since it was over, Zheng Yuan could only suppress the jealousy that was gnawing at his heart. He forced a smile and said, "Good Pinger, this is also your own good fortune. I am not as good as you." Ding Nan was extremely good at observing people's expressions. Just now, she had even noticed a flash of murderous intent in Zheng Yuan's eyes. She was shocked and wanted to resist, but Zheng Yuan had accumulated power for a long time and had an extremely overbearing powerful magical weapon in his hands. Although she had the threaded hairpin of soul traversing, she didn't know many magic. If they really fought, she would definitely be in danger. At this critical moment, Ding Nan thought quickly and immediately said with a charming smile, "Master, if I'm good, isn't that good for you?" Her words made Zheng Yuan's heart skip a beat. He saw that the beautiful Ding Nan was pleasing him with a charming smile on her face. He thought to himself, yes, as the leader of the Yin-Yang sect, isn't he best at the art of the Yin and Yang integration in the bedroom? Zheng Yuan laughed and said, "Good Pinger, you're right. If you're good, isn't that good for me? I'll try the Yin and Yang integration with you. Let me experience the magical power of the spiritual qi of the elixir of life." When Ding Nan suddenly heard this, she wanted to slap herself in the face. Her face suddenly stiffened, and her hand unconsciously reached for the threaded hairpin of soul traversing behind her. She gritted her teeth and thought to herself, "This old pervert finally can't stand it anymore. If you dare to touch me, I'll die with you." Chapter 583. Zheng Yuan was also a shrewd man. When he heard that Ding Nan was going to practice the yin-yang integration technique with him, his expression suddenly changed, and his eyes showed strong resistance and hostility. Go to the internet. For a moment, Zheng Yuan was very suspicious. LV Fengping used to be a very coquettish woman. She had always been very active in practicing the yin-yang integration technique, but since she had occupied this body, her temperament had changed greatly. Is she Pinger or not? Zheng Yuan looked at Ding Nan in bewilderment. His eyes narrowed more and more, and a strong killing intent gradually appeared in them. Seeing Zheng Yuan's reaction, Ding Nan's heart suddenly trembled. She knew that she was no match for him. Even though he was seriously injured at this time, who knew what other tricks he had up his sleeve? Ding Nan had an idea and immediately said with a charming smile, "Master, do you want to practice the yin-yang integration technique with Pinger? That's great. But..." Zheng Yuan stared at her coldly. "But what?" Ding Nan nestled up to Zheng Yuan in an enchanting manner and said charmingly, "Master, your body is so weak now. Aren't you afraid that I'll suck you dry?" Zheng Yuan stared at Ding Nan. After a long time, he laughed and said, "Do you think I'm old?" Ding Nan smiled charmingly and said, "Of course I'm old, but Pinger is worried about you. As the saying goes, beauty is a source of calamity." Seeing Ding Nan acting coquettishly, Zheng Yuan's original doubts suddenly dissipated a lot. He laughed and said, "What you said is not unreasonable." As he spoke, he looked at Alba, only to see that although Alba was a Western woman, her pelvic bones were tightly locked and her eyebrows were not open. Obviously she was a virgin. What was more rare was that her eyes were full of vitality. In addition, she didn't know any cultivation techniques, so she was simply the best cauldron for plucking. Zheng Yuan was overjoyed and said with a smile, "Well, I'll let you go today. I want to have a taste of this foreign girl today." As he said this, he got up and walked toward Alba step by step. Although Ding Nan had successfully dispelled Jing Yuan's doubts, she hadn't expected that he would change his target and target Alba again. She was shocked and shouted, "Master." Jing Yuan tilted his head slightly and said meaningfully, "Why do you think I can't deal with a girl who hasn't even reached the Zhuji phase?" When Ding Nan heard this, she suddenly swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She forced a smile and said, "Master, what are you talking about? I mean, the Caucasian is very powerful. Be careful." He walked over to Alba, grabbed her chin with one hand and said with a proud smile, "Little girl, serve me well. Maybe if I'm happy, I'll accept you as my disciple." After that, he took Alba and was about to walk into the inner room. Alba was not a fool. Although she couldn't understand the conversation between Ding Nan and Jing Yuan, she could see the look in the man's eyes when he was beastly. She suddenly struggled violently and shouted at Ding Nan in horror, "Help, help me!" Ding Nan watched helplessly as Alba was carried on Jing Yuan's shoulder and taken into the inner room. She gritted her teeth and turned her face away, not wanting to watch this scene anymore. However, Alba's cries kept coming from the inner room, cutting Ding Nan's eardrums and heart like a sharp knife. "Help! Oh my God, is no one going to save me? Don't you have any brothers and sisters? If one day you see them being insulted like this, will you stand by and watch? Didn't you promise me that you wouldn't hurt me? You liar. You liar. You just said that you have a man you love. Do you know why he hates you? Just because you did such a thing. Do you still have any humanity? Do you still have a conscience? If he knows what you've done, how will you face him in the future?" Alba's screams almost tore Ding Nan apart. She instantly remembered that she had planned to frame Zhou Qin, but she had been framed by Zhou Qin. She had cried in despair in the room. Ding Nan suddenly seemed to understand why Zhou Qin had suddenly turned around at that time and saved her from the clutches of He Xiao. Could it be, because I had cried and said something like, "How will you face him in the future?" Ding Nan's heart trembled violently. There seemed to be a voice in her mind shouting crazily, "If he finds out what you've done in the future, do you still expect him to look you in the eye? It's useless. Even if you become a golden immortal, it's useless. Li Yundong won't even look at you," she thought. At this moment, Alba suddenly let out a miserable scream. Ding Nan suddenly trembled all over. She gritted her teeth, immediately took out the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, and rushed into the stone room. However, when Ding Nan rushed to the door, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. She took a deep breath and quickly calmed down. She even unbuttoned 2 buttons on her chest, revealing a snow-white chest and a deep ravine. After Ding Nan tidied herself up, she walked into the stone room and saw Jing Yuan panting as he dealt with Alba, who was struggling hard. If it had been in the past, Alba would have been exhausted long ago, but she had just been transformed by the Duan Jindan, so her strength was far greater than that of an ordinary person. In addition, Jing Yuan had been seriously injured before, and he was unwilling to waste his essence qi to control Alba with magic. As a result, he had forced himself on her and made himself quite embarrassed. Jing Yuan felt someone coming from behind him. He turned his head warily, only to see Ding Nan standing behind him in a seductive manner. He was stunned and asked, "Pinger, what are you doing here?" Ding Nan deliberately covered her mouth and laughed. "I heard that there was too much noise here, so I came to help you, master." Jing Yuan smiled awkwardly and said, "This foreign girl is really strong. You came at the right time. Help me hold her down." Ding Nan saw that Alba's clothes were disheveled and her eyes were glaring at her as if they were about to spit fire, but she didn't seem to notice. She walked over to Jing Yuan with a charming smile, put one hand on his shoulder and pressed the other on Alba's wrist. She said with a smile, "Master, I'll watch the battle from the side." Seeing that Ding Nan was really willing to help, Jing Yuan was overjoyed and his doubts and vigilance disappeared. He laughed and said, "My good disciple, when I recover my strength, I'll let you participate in the battle in person." With Ding Nan's help, Jing Yuan was about to get carried away when he suddenly felt a numbness in his waist. He couldn't help looking back at Ding Nan and touching his back. With this touch, Jing Yuan felt a cold metal object. Of course, Jing Yuan knew what it was. It was the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, which specialized in absorbing the essence and blood of people's souls. Jing Yuan's whole body trembled. He looked at Ding Nan with his mouth wide open and said in shock and anger, Are you crazy?" Ding Nan saw that Jing Yuan's waist had been pierced by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, but not only did he not fall, his essence and blood were not being sucked away by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Shocked, she immediately slapped Zheng Yuan with her palm. Seeing that he was in a life-and-death situation, Zheng Yuan didn't care about saving his Jinqi and spiritual energy. He immediately slapped Ding Nan with his palm. As soon as their palms collided, they were both sent flying more than 2 meters away. Although Zheng Yuan's cultivation had not broken through to the Jinxin phase for decades, his strength was not something that ordinary cultivators could compare with. Although his body had been broken by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, he had used his many years of solid foundation to lock his essence and blood to prevent it from being sucked away. Zheng Yuan looked at Ding Nan in disbelief and asked in a trembling voice, "Pinger, what are you doing?" Ding Nan gritted her teeth and sneered. "Bah, who's your Pinger?" Zheng Yuan's expression changed dramatically. He seemed to have figured out all the problems at once, and his face suddenly became extremely ferocious. "So that's how it is, that's how it is. It turns out that I was right before. Little girl, you're so scheming and scheming." Ding Nan sneered and stared at Zheng Yuan vigilantly and nervously, not saying anything. Zheng Yuan grinned hideously and said, "Do you think a mere threaded hairpin of soul traversal can deal with me? You deceived your master and destroyed your ancestors. Stop dreaming." As he said this, he was about to jump out of the cave. But just as he was about to move, Alba, who was next to him, suddenly pounced on him. Like a mad beast, she bumped into Zheng Yuan. At this time, Zheng Yuan had focused all his energy on resisting the powerful suction of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, and his attention was focused on Ding Nan. How could he have noticed Alba? If this had happened in normal times, Zheng Yuan would have been able to send Alba flying more than 10 meters away with a wave of his sleeve, but at this time, Zheng Yuan only felt his whole body shake. Most importantly, Alba's shoulder had hit the threaded hairpin of soul traversal on his waist. This time, Zheng Yuan could no longer control himself, and all the essence and blood in his body were quickly absorbed by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Zheng Yuan suddenly let out an earth-shattering howl, and his skin quickly withered and turned yellow. Seeing this scene, Alba was so scared that her whole body went limp. She screamed and crawled away on all fours. Zheng Yuan looked at Ding Nan in pain and shouted unwillingly, "You deceived your master and destroyed your ancestors. I won't let you go." Ding Nan gritted her teeth and sneered. "I'm not your disciple. How can I deceive my master and destroy my ancestors?" Zheng Yuan laughed wildly. "I've been keeping you by my side these days. Who in the cultivation world doesn't know that you're my disciple? If they find out that you deceived your own master and killed him, I'm afraid that there will be no place for you in this world. The first iron law of the cultivation world is that you can't use magic and powerful magical weapons on secular mortals, but do you know what the second iron law of the cultivation world is? It's that you can't deceive your master and destroy your ancestors. You will have a divine punishment." As Zheng Yuan shouted wildly, the essence and blood in his body were constantly being absorbed by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. His originally smooth and delicate skin had already become wrinkled like the bark of an old, withered tree. His whole body was like a skeleton, which was extremely terrifying. But the most terrifying thing was that at the moment of his death, Zheng Yuan was still viciously cursing and shouting, "I'll wait for you. You will have a divine punishment. The cultivation world will never let go of any deceiving and destroying your ancestors." After Zheng Yuan roared, his yang spirit and all his qi and blood were sucked clean. Finally, he was completely sucked into a dry corpse, and his body fell to the ground with a puff. Seeing a living person being sucked into a mummy in the blink of an eye, Ding Nan was also secretly horrified. More importantly, Zheng Yuan's ferocious curse before his death made her feel uneasy and terrified. She had been in the cultivation world for a long time, so she naturally knew what it meant if others found out about deceiving and destroying one's ancestors. Seeing that Ding Nan was standing there in a daze for a moment, Alba cried and said to Ding Nan, "I knew you were a good person. Thank you for saving me. Thank you so much. God will protect you. I won't tell anyone about what happened today. I promise." But no matter what she said, Ding Nan remained motionless like a wooden man. Seeing that Ding Nan didn't respond, Alba asked tentatively, "Can I go now?" After asking, she saw that Ding Nan still didn't respond, so she finally got up and wanted to go out. But as soon as she reached the door, she heard Ding Nan say in a cold voice, "Where do you want to go?" Alba trembled all over and said in a trembling voice, I want to go home." Ding Nan slowly turned her face, and a strange and ferocious expression appeared on her pretty face. "You watched me kill John and then you watched me kill my master. Where else do you think you want to go?" Alba was shocked. She knelt down with a thud and begged bitterly, "Let me go. I definitely won't tell anyone. I definitely won't tell anyone. Don't kill me. Ding Nan walked slowly to Alba's side. She lifted Alba's chin with her finger and said with a sneer, "From today on, I will be the leader of the Yin Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, and you will be my new disciple. If one day I find that you want to escape, I will cut off your left leg if you take a step with your left leg, and your right leg if you take a step with your right leg. If you take a step with both legs, I will make it so that you will never be able to stand up again. Do you understand?" As the saying goes, a woman's heart is the most poisonous. At this time, Alba was scared out of her wits. For a moment she looked at Ding Nan in a daze. She suddenly felt that the beautiful woman in front of her was vicious and cruel, even more so than Zheng Yuan. She felt as if she had just escaped from the claws of a wolf and immediately fell into the mouth of a tiger. Alba didn't know that her cultivation career would begin in such an unpleasant way, but what she didn't know was what kind of cultivation achievements she would achieve in the future, and what kind of terrifying, great cultivator her master, Ding Nan, would become. Chapter 584. When Ding Nan killed Jing Yuan with her own hands, Li Yundong was struggling to advance to the most important stage of cultivation. Go to the internet. At this time, Li Yundong had fallen into the deepest state of meditation. His whole body was surrounded by dazzling colorful brilliance, which was sometimes strong and sometimes weak. Ao Wushuang looked at him with bright eyes, looking quite nervous. Ao Wushuang knew that the Zhuji phase was a threshold to distinguish ordinary people from cultivators. Shintong was the threshold to distinguish an ordinary cultivator from a master cultivator, and Jinshin was the threshold to distinguish ordinary cultivators from great cultivators. Since ancient times, there had been countless cultivators in the Chinese cultivation world, but there were very few who had really cultivated to the Jinshin phase. In all dynasties, there had been cultivators who had cultivated to the Jinshin phase. They were all respected as great cultivators in the cultivation world, and the emperor would also look up to them. In the Song, Yuan and Ming dynasties, the leaders of the Jingyi school and the Chuanzhen school would be called Great Shinran by the emperor. Chinese people like to be big and happy, and they like to use the word big in almost everything. However, in the cultivation world there were many people who called each other Jinren or cultivators, but it was rare to have the word big in front of it. In the cultivation world, there was a saying that when the word one and big were combined, it was called heaven, which meant that when a cultivator cultivated to the great cultivator realm, he would have the power to fight against heaven. The Zhuji phase was to cultivate the human body into Niden, so as to complete the transformation from an ordinary person to a cultivator. The Shintong was to give cultivators special power to cast spells. The Yang spirit was to give cultivators the ability to transcend life and death. The Jinshin meant that cultivators began to stand tall and have the power to challenge heaven. I didn't expect that a guy who has only cultivated for half a year is going to break through the Jinshin phase. Ao Wushuang looked at Li Yundong with emotion. She stared at him for a long time, and then moved her eyes to Su Chan. At this time, Su Chan had already shown her fox body. She lay quietly in a small corner, her body curled up into a ball, and her huge red fox tail almost covered her whole body. The end of her tail was slowly growing from 3 tails to 4 tails and from 4 tails to 5 tails. Ao Wushuang knew that although the cultivation of foxes was the same as that of humans, there were 9 levels of heaven. However, due to the special physique of the fox demon body, the number of tails of the fox was not the same as the realm of cultivators. For foxes, the 2 most difficult hurdles were the 3-tailed and 8-tailed ones. From a 2-tailed fox spirit to a 3-tailed demon fox, this meant that foxes could transform into human form and use the human body to cultivate further. If any species wanted to cultivate to a higher realm, they must first cultivate from their original form into a human form. This was because all living things in the world were born, and humans were the spiritual beings of all living things. Cultivating would yield twice the results with half the effort. A fox with 3 tails was equivalent to the Shintong realm of a cultivator and could use all kinds of magic or demonic arts. Breaking through to 4 tails meant breaking through to the primary Yin spirit realm of a cultivator. 5 tails was equivalent to the top Yin spirit realm of a cultivator. 6 tails was equivalent to the primary Yang spirit realm, and 7 tails was equivalent to the top Yang spirit realm. The biggest difference between a fox and a cultivator was that the fox's cultivation speed would slow down in the later stages. From 7 tails to 8 tails, it would realize a huge leap in strength. It would directly cross the Jinshin realm and break through to the early stage of the Thunder Retribution realm. For foxes, the gap between 7 tails and 8 tails was like the gap between a Yang spirit and a Jinshin master. However, although the gap between the Jinshin and the Thunder Retribution realms was huge, it was not as huge as the gap between the Yang Spirit and the Jinshin, which was completely invincible. At this time, when the seventh tail slowly grew from the end of Su Chan's tail, Ao Wushuang suddenly became nervous. She stared at Su Chan's tail to see if there was any sign of the eighth tail growing. But after waiting for a while, Ao Wushuang saw that the fiery red fur on Su Chan's body began to slowly fade, and she gradually turned back into a human form. Ao Wushuang sighed in her heart and shook her head secretly. After a while, Su Chan was the first to wake up from her deep slumber with a groan. As soon as Su Chan opened her eyes and looked around, she found that she was in her former home in Shantang, Dongwu City. Not far away, Ao Wushuang was standing with a smile on her face. "Master?" Su Chan said with surprise and joy, "It's really you. I thought I was dreaming at that time. Did you save us?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and said with a smile, "No, it was the former leader Shibui who saved you." Su Chan was stunned. "Grandmaster? Lu Yi?" The little girl couldn't help but think of the last bolt of lightning that had magically struck down. She said in surprise, "Grandmaster is really not dead? He is a Thunder Retribution Master? No way." Ao Wushuang smiled slightly. "Is it strange? He was a seven-tailed fox many years ago. After more than 10 years he has become an eight-tailed fox. What's so strange about that?" Su Chan's eyes widened and she said incredulously, "But since he is a master of lightning retribution, why did he rather watch so many Shiji and Shimi die when our Fox Zen school was besieged and attacked?" The smile on Ao Wushuang's face faded. She took a deep breath and said slowly, "Channer, there are some things that you'd better not know." Su Chan's face was full of anxiety. She quickly walked over to Ao Wushuang and argued, "But Master, I don't need to know, but Yundong has been involved. It's because Grandmaster pretended to be dead that he inherited the position of leader of the Fox Zen school. Do you know how much he has sacrificed in order to be a good leader? Do you know how much he has to worry about the Fox Zen school every day?" Ao Wushuang fixed her eyes on Su Chan and suddenly smiled. "Sure enough, girls are more outgoing. Don't you think about your fellow disciples at all? Do you only think about Yundong?" Su Chan said unhappily, "I've never been in the Fox Zen school since I was a child. Whether I'm a member of the Fox Zen school or not, I don't care at all. I only care about Yundong. Where is Grandmaster? I want to see him. Why did he pretend to be dead? This is tantamount to the death of many Shiji and Shimi. And Yundong has been implicated. How many times has he been scolded because he is the leader of the Fox Zen school? If he weren't the leader of the Fox Zen school, I don't know how respected he would be now." Ao Wushuang sighed softly and said, "Silly girl, don't be silly. Even if he doesn't want to be the leader, as long as he is with you, he will still be scolded. Do you think that since ancient times, few people who have been a couple with us fox spirits have had a good ending?" Su Chan said unhappily, "Anyway, I'm going to ask Grandmaster. Even if he doesn't give the Fox Zen school an explanation, he has to give Yundong one." With that, she was in a hurry to go out. However, Ao Wushuang glared at her unhappily and shouted in a low voice, "Where are you going? Where are you going to find him? Do you know?" I don't know." Su Chan opened her mouth and swallowed her words helplessly. However, she soon became happy again. "Master, you must know, right?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, "I don't know. Now he is being watched by the bald donkeys of Shiyuan Temple and Jinshan Temple every day. He takes them around in circles all day long. I can't find him unless he contacts me." Su Chan was stunned. "Shiyuan Temple and Jinshan Temple? Why are they watching Grandmaster?" Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Humph. How dare they not keep an eye on the eight-tailed fox? With Ao Wushuang's nine-tailed fox as an example, how dare they be careless? What if Lu Yi reaches the realm of the nine-tailed fox?" Su Chan asked in confusion, "But I've seen the abbot of Shiyuan Temple. Master Purin is an eminent monk. He shouldn't be such a person who can't distinguish between good and evil. Could it be that Grandmaster did something?" Ao Wushuang immediately shook her head and said, "Channer, don't ask any more. Grandmaster has his own difficulties. If he wants to pretend to be dead, he has no choice. Besides, even if you don't believe him, you should believe me, right? Don't worry, he won't hurt you. Don't ask any more. All you know is that Grandmaster is still alive and he saved you." Su Chan lowered her head. She hesitated for a long time, then suddenly raised her head and asked, "Master, can you tell Yundong about this?" Ao Wushuang said flatly, "No." Su Chan immediately jumped up and said in surprise, "Why not?" What happened in Mount Qingqing last time was aimed at Yundong, but you didn't let me tell him. Why can't I tell him this time? Ao Wushuang shook her head like a rattled drum. She said, Chan'er, you have to believe me. I won't hurt you. He is your lover and I won't hurt him. If he finds out, it will be a disaster for him. Nothing good will happen. Su Chan said angrily, but if you hide it from him like this, what if something happens? How will he deal with it? Ao Wushuang said, he has now broken through the biggest gap between cultivators and broken through to the Jinshin phase. Although he is only at the primary level of the Jinshin, he has the Dharmakaya of the reincarnation of Wisdom King, the Mantra Mahamudra, and other powerful magical weapons. The power of the Jinshin will double. Even if he meets a top master of the Jinshin, he will have the power to fight. When he reaches the intermediate level of the Jinshin, he can even fight against a master of the Thunder Retribution. Hey, since ancient times the Yang spirit can't beat the Jinshin. This is an iron law. But there has never been a saying that the Jinshin can't beat the Thunder Retribution. Ao Wushuang's face gradually softened. She said softly to Su Chan, so don't worry. Your Yundong will be fine. I did this for your own good. Su Chan looked at Ao Wushuang in a daze and asked in confusion, but master, why didn't you tell Yundong about these things for my own good? Ao Wushuang gently stroked Su Chan's hair and said with a smile, you'll know in the future. For now it's better for you not to know. The only thing you know is that I will never hurt you. Su Chan stared at Ao Wushuang and saw that her eyes were full of pity and love. After all, she had been brought up by Ao Wushuang since she was a child. Her trust and dependence on her were almost instinctive. Although her heart was full of doubts, she still nodded slowly. But she still said worriedly, Master, you can't hurt Yundong? Ao Wushuang chuckled. Just as she was about to speak, she saw Li Yundong exhale and wake up slowly. The colorful light around him gradually condensed into a ball of golden light, enveloping his body, as if his whole body was plated with a layer of gold. Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, your golden lover has woken up. Seeing that Li Yundong had woken up, Su Chan immediately put all the questions in her mind to the back of her mind for the time being. She rushed over with a cheer and said with a smile, Yundong, you're awake? Li Yundong saw Su Chan, who was smiling sweetly, rushing toward him like a swallow flying into the forest. He caught the little girl and looked around in surprise. Then he said to Ao Wushuang, who was not far away in even more surprise, Senior Ao Wushuang? Why are you here? Why am I here? Did you save us? Ao Wushuang smiled and said non-committally, I didn't expect that you would get a blessing in disguise. You smashed the 3 Diyuan Jindans and shared them with others. Although the efficacy of the medicine has decreased a little, it has created several Jinshin masters at the same time. What an anomaly. Li Yundong smiled and said with a sigh, I didn't expect it to be like this either. Fate makes fun of people. As he said this, Li Yundong couldn't help asking, Senior Ao Wushuang, did you also use heavenly thunder to drive Su Ling away? Ao Wushuang smiled and was about to speak when she saw that Ziyuan and Zhou Qin next to her had also woken up one after another. Su Chan was overjoyed and said, Ah, Sister Ziyuan and Sister Zhou Qin are both awake. Have they also reached the Jinshin phase? As she spoke, Chris, who was beside her, also let out a groan. A layer of white mist surrounded the top of her head, condensing and evaporating from the Baihui acupoint. Seeing that they had woken up one after another, Li Yundong put this question aside for the time being. He looked at Ziyuan and Zhou Qin with concern, and then turned his eyes to Chris. Facing this blonde foreign girl who had always vowed to worship him as her master, Li Yundong suddenly felt very conflicted. Chris, who was in front of him, had obviously also inhaled the divine aura of elixir. Although the amount was not much, it had completely changed her physique. It was just like when he had been cleansed by the Renyuan Jindan. If she could cultivate, she would be able to break through the Zhuji phase, Yang spirit phase, and even go straight to the Jinshin phase. Such a good seedling who was so eager to cultivate. Should he accept her as a disciple? Li Yundong fell into hesitation for a moment. I'm in a very bad state. I owe everyone one update. I'll make it up to you later. Chapter 585. After Ziyuan and Zhou Qin woke up, they also looked around in surprise. They didn't understand why they had appeared in such a place. They went to see the net. But soon they saw Ao Wushuang and roughly understood what had happened and how it had developed. Ziyuan felt the changes in the Yuanine genuine qi in her body and said with emotion, I didn't expect that we would accidentally get the divine qi of elixir and break through to the Jinshin phase. It's really a good fortune. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, this is called good karma. Look at Jing Yuan and Ling Kong Shuangdao. They tried their best to snatch the Dian Jin Dan, but they were destined not to have a share. Zi Yuan thought of Jing Yuan's method of harming others without benefiting himself. She shook her head and smiled. If Zheng Yuan knew that what he did had benefited us, I'm afraid he would die of anger. Li Yundong snorted and said, next time I see this old guy, I must deal with him on behalf of God. Zhou Qin suddenly said, I wonder how Alba is doing. Speaking of Alba, everyone in the room looked at Chris. At this time, Chris also woke up slowly and let out a long breath. This breath condensed and sprayed on the wall like a sharp arrow. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin looked at each other, and a thought came to their minds. Chris has also inhaled the divine chi of elixir. What about Alba? What should Li Yundong do? How should he deal with it? After Chris woke up, she slowly opened her eyes and looked around blankly. But what she saw was no longer the terrible killing and fighting on Tiandu Peak. She was in a traditional Chinese room, surrounded by antique furniture. If Chris hadn't found Li Yundong and the others standing beside her, she would have thought that she had been in her own room and that the trip to China was just a thrilling dream. But the truth was cruel and irreversible. Chris opened her mouth as if she had 1,000 words to say, but in the end she just said blankly, am I still alive? Zhou Qin, who had always been very sympathetic to Chris, said softly, Chris, you are still alive. Don't worry, you are safe now. Chris glanced at Zhou Qin, and her eyes involuntarily fell on the Vulcan's whip wrapped around her waist. Then her eyes fell on Li Yunyang and Zi Yuan. She remembered the terrifying fighting and magical fighting she had seen on the Huangshan Cableway on Tiandu Peak. This blonde, blue-eyed Pennsylvania student suddenly had an unrealistic feeling. Who are you? Are they aliens? Zhou Qin smiled and said, Chris, like you, we are all ordinary people. However, we are cultivators among ordinary people. In fact, Chris knew the answer, but in her opinion, cultivators should only have some special abilities. Even if it was the scene she had seen on the Huangshan Cableway, she could accept it. However, the earth-shattering fighting scene she had seen on Tiandu Peak had far exceeded the limit of her imagination. In her opinion, a person like Li Yundong already had almost incredible power. He was completely a Superman or even more than Superman. Is there really such a person on Earth? Chris looked at Zhou Qin in a daze, and after a while she couldn't help looking at Li Yundong. Li Yundong sighed softly and said, Chris, now do you know why I can't easily accept you as my disciples? Chris opened her mouth as if she wanted to argue, but she was also a very smart person. She quickly figured out the key point. If such magic was passed on to an outsider like her, and she passed it on to her own people, what would happen? Chris was extremely unwilling, but she also lowered her head in resignation and murmured in English, John, I'm sorry. I couldn't fulfill your last wish. Li Yundong, he won't teach me. Although I have Chinese blood, I am not a black-haired, yellow-skinned Chinese. Li Yundong is right. This kind of cultivation is a national weapon of China. He won't teach it to foreigners like us. In the past, when I read the history of China, I never understood why the great ancient Indian civilization, the equally great ancient Egyptian civilization, and even the ancient Babylonian civilization, which created the brilliant Hanging Garden, all declined without exception and even died out. Only the Chinese civilization, which has been passed down for 5,000 years, has never been cut off. Now I understand. My grandmother was right. There are hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China, and there are hidden masters everywhere. They may not show themselves at ordinary times, but when you get to know them in depth, you will know the vastness and greatness of this nation. Chris murmured softly as if she were talking in her sleep. At the end of her words, she couldn't help but think of the time when she, John, and Alba had come to China with great ambitions. They had been in high spirits and bickering with each other. But now she was the only one who was safe. John had fallen off a cliff, and Alba had been kidnapped. No one knew whether she was alive or dead. All of this was like a terrible nightmare. Not only had she not been able to cultivate, but she had also not been able to fulfill John's last wish. Thinking of this, Chris couldn't help but feel sad. Tears flowed down her cheeks. As she cried, she said to Li Yundong, can you promise me one thing? Li Yundong was born with a tender heart for women. Seeing Chris crying like a pear blossom in the rain, his heart softened and he said, tell me, what is it? Chris cried, John fell off a cliff and is probably dead. Alba came to China with us. If anything happens to her, I really can't explain it to her family. Can you promise me that you will find her? Bring her back safe and sound? Li Yundong nodded slowly and firmly. I promise you. But you have to promise me one thing. Chris wiped her tears and said with tears in her eyes, what is it? Li Yundong said, you must not call the police. Moreover, you can't tell Alba's family anything about her or us. Chris was stunned and asked anxiously, why? Li Yundong said seriously, Zheng Yuan is cruel and merciless and Ding Nan is not easy to deal with. Since they kidnapped Alba, it means that they have a plan. If you call the police, the secular police will intervene. At that time, in order to protect themselves, they will definitely try to kill Alba and silence her. If we don't call the police, we can still find a way to get Alba back through our own strength. Do you understand? The more you push, the more dangerous Alba will be. The looser you push, the safer she will be. Chris thought for a moment and said helplessly and sadly, well, I think I understand. As she said this, she wiped the tears on her face, smiled bitterly and said, in that case I'll leave first. Seeing that she was about to leave, Zhou Qin couldn't help asking, Chris, aren't you going with us? Chris looked at Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the cold and elegant Ao Wushuang. She clearly felt that she was out of place with them. She shook her head in disappointment and said desolately, no, I have to go to Mount Huangshan again. Maybe I can find John's body. I have to take it back. Her words made the atmosphere in the room heavy and sad. Even Su Chan, who had rejected Chris, felt her heart soften for a moment. She looked at her leaving figure and felt sorry for her. Seeing her turn around and walk to the door, Li Yundong suddenly asked, Chris, can you answer me? Why do you want to cultivate? Chris suddenly stopped. She was lost in thought for a long time before she turned around and said with a bitter smile, at first I was just curious, especially when my grandmother told me that there were mysterious people in the distant and mysterious China who had the art of immortality. At that time I was very curious. Was there really a way to live forever in this world? With this suspicion in mind, I returned to this land, but what happened next changed my opinion. I no longer want to cultivate for the sake of immortality. I'm just curious about where this power comes from. Why are people so strong? Chris said softly, the one who wants to cultivate the most is John. His desire for power is strong, and he wants to know the answer to all this more urgently than I do. But now that he is gone, his will has fallen on my shoulders. I have the obligation and responsibility to figure it out for him. What is cultivation? This is for myself but also for him. Chris's words made everyone in the room fall into silence with different expressions. Zi Yuan, Su Chan and Ao Wushuang were born cultivators. They were born in the cultivation world and took all this for granted. Li Yundong and Zhou Qin deeply resonated with Chris's words. At the beginning they were also like Chris, full of strong curiosity about the power of cultivation. In order to understand it, they would do anything. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on Chris. He nodded slowly and said, in that case, you can stay with me for the time being. I will slowly explain to you what cultivation is. It can be regarded as a little compensation for John. Chris was stunned, and then her eyes widened as if she had been saved from a desperate situation. In despair she suddenly saw the dawn of hope. She said in a trembling voice, You agree to accept me as a disciple? Li Yundong smiled slightly and shook his head. No, I just promise you that I will slowly tell you what cultivation is all about. But I can't accept you as a disciple for the time being. You can hang your name in my sect first. You can be regarded as a registered disciple, not an official disciple. Chris was familiar with China. She knew that there was only a thin line between a registered disciple and an official disciple. Since Li Yundong had agreed today, as long as she worked hard to cultivate with him in the future, she would be able to achieve her wish one day. Chris was overjoyed. She was about to kneel down and kowtow, but Li Yundong quickly stopped her in midair and held her body a few meters away. Li Yundong smiled and said, Don't worry. If God really wants you to be my disciple, this kowtow can be done later. When Chris saw that Li Yundong's hand had stopped her from kneeling, she was in awe and admiration. She lowered her head and said, Okay, master. Li Yundong waved his hand and said with a smile, Don't call me master. You can call me Li Yundong. Chris thought for a moment and shouted, Then I'll call you Master Li, okay? Li Yundong saw that she was stubborn, but this was a compromise, so he nodded with a smile. Just as he was about to continue speaking, he saw Su Chan gently tugging at the corner of his clothes and winking at him. Li Yundong knew that Su Chan had something to say to him, so he walked with her to another room. As soon as they entered, Su Chan said anxiously in a low voice, Yundong, how can you accept an outsider as a disciple? Aren't you afraid that the cultivation method will be leaked? Li Yundong laughed and said, Silly girl, didn't you see that Chris has already inhaled the divine aura of elixir? If I don't accept her as a disciple today, what if other sects see her in the future? If they accept her as a disciple and it happens to be against us, what should we do? Su Chan was stunned, but then she snorted and said, Are we afraid of a barbarian? Li Yundong shook his head and couldn't help laughing. You can't say that. Now our Fox Zen school has enemies on all sides. If a hostile sect sees that she has outstanding talent and accepts her as a disciple, not only will there be the danger of the secret cultivation method being leaked, but we will also set up a strong enemy for ourselves. Although her strength is weak now, Westerners are born with abundant qi and blood. She is a good candidate for cultivation. With the transformation of the divine aura of elixir, her cultivation speed will definitely be very amazing. But Su Chan was still a little unconvinced, but she had to admit that Li Yundong's words made sense. She wanted to object, but she couldn't find a reason at the moment. Li Yundong said with a smile, No buts. Instead of letting others control her fate, it's better for us to control this uncertain factor ourselves. Only then did Su Chan stop talking. She smiled and said, Well, what you said makes sense. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other and smiled, then walked out hand in hand. I'm going to be very busy recently. As for what exactly I'm busy with, because of some confidential reasons it's a little inconvenient for me to say, but I believe that everyone will know after a while if nothing unexpected happens. There are 2 updates today and 1 more in the evening. It's estimated that I still have to continue to miss 1 update. I'll try my best to make it up tomorrow. Tang, I bow to everyone. I'm sorry. Chapter 586. When Li Yundong took Chris and the others back home in Tianan City, it was already the next morning. The little foxes who had just gotten up had no idea that something that could change the whole situation of the cultivation world had happened last night. Watch net. 7 When they saw Li Yundong come back with Chris, they all looked at her curiously and whispered to each other. After Li Yundong gave Chris a few instructions, Chris returned to the room that Li Yundong had arranged for her. Ziyuan winked at Li Yundong. After Li Yundong and Ziyuan entered their room, Ziyuan whispered, Li Yundong, do you feel strange? Li Yundong smiled and said, What's strange? Ziyuan said, Who on earth struck that heavenly thunder? It's not you, it's not me. Could it be Ao Wushuang? Only a master of thunder retribution can control such a powerful heavenly thunder. Is Ao Wushuang an 8-tailed fox? Li Yundong's face darkened slightly. He said, I also thought of this, but when I asked Ao Wushuang, she avoided talking about it. I feel like she's hiding something from me. Ziyuan frowned slightly. What could she be hiding from us? Since you want to save us, why are you hiding? After a while, he suddenly raised his head and said in a low voice, Could it be Lui? Ziyuan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes lit up and she exclaimed in a low voice, It's very possible. But she quickly frowned and said, But why won't he show up? Is he plotting something? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, Don't worry about him. Any conspiracy in this world is based on strength. As long as we are strong enough, it doesn't matter how many schemes we have. Was Yen Fang's means powerful enough? But why did he fail again and again? It was all because he wasn't strong enough. Now that we are lucky enough to obtain the divine aura of elixir and have broken through to the golden body realm, we should strike while the iron is hot and further achieve a breakthrough in our cultivation. The inauguration ceremony of the head of the Linggong sect will be held in a while. At that time spring would arrive. Once spring arrives, it will be the best time to undergo the lightning tribulation. Seeing that he still remembered the affairs of his sect at this time, Ziyuan felt warm in her heart. She smiled slightly and said, The affairs of our Linggong sect are just a trivial matter. The most important thing now is that you must be on guard against the provocations and challenges of other sects that may come at any time. I believe that before long, everyone in the cultivation world will know that we have obtained the Diuan Jindan. At that time, although the cultivators in the world may not immediately come to kill us, there will definitely be a lot of jealousy and hatred. Li Yundong chuckled and said, The divine qi of elixir has long been melted into the bloodline. They can't snatch it even if they want to. The only thing I'm worried about is a few things. The first is the whereabouts of the Medicine King tripod. I don't know who has it. Ziyuan nodded slightly and said, The Medicine King tripod is the supreme magical weapon of our Taoist alchemy. With it, even if you can't refine Renyuan Jindan or Diyuan Jindan, it will still be a very good furnace for refining other elixirs. The success rate and production rate will be many times higher than that of ordinary pill tripods. It would be great if we could find the Medicine King tripod first. Li Yundong pondered for a moment and then said, "You're right. The second thing is that I want to cultivate in seclusion immediately and maximize the efficacy of the elixir, but I'm very worried that John and Alba's families will come to China, which will cause a lot of trouble. Therefore, I haven't decided for the time being whether I should go to Mount Wuhua to snatch Alba back and get rid of Zheng Yuan, the big devil, or go into seclusion for the time being and digest the elixir first." Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, "The Diyuan Jindan only appears once in 500 years. It's a rare opportunity. You'd better go into seclusion first. If there's anything else, leave it to others to deal with." Li Yundong said with some embarrassment, "But Chris wants to go to Mount Huangshan to find John. She can't do it without someone accompanying her. Are you going with her? You've all absorbed the divine chi of elixir. Wouldn't it be a waste if you don't go into seclusion?" Ziyuan also frowned in embarrassment. She thought for a while, then smiled and said, "I have an idea. Go find your classmate Feng Na and ask her to accompany Chris. With a secular person by her side, even if a cultivator wants to do something to her, he will be afraid. It's best to ask her to find a few more people. The more people there are, the safer Chris will be." Li Yundong laughed and said, "That's a good idea. Let's do that." Li Yundong quickly went out, picked up his mobile phone and dialed Feng Na's number. After the phone was connected, Feng Na said in surprise, "Oh my God, this is the first time you've taken the initiative to call me. Did the sun rise from the west? Dragon God hero, what's the matter?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Can't I call you if I have nothing to do?" Feng Na smiled and said, "Come on, you don't come to the temple for nothing. Tell me what's the matter." Li Yundong smiled and told her about Chris's situation. Then he asked, "If it's convenient for you, can you accompany Chris to Mount Huangshan to find John's whereabouts?" When Feng Na heard about John falling off the cliff, she was shocked. "What? John fell off the cliff? What happened?" Li Yundong said with some embarrassment, "If you can help, Chris will tell you the details when you see her. I'll pay for your travel expenses. If you can't, then forget it. It doesn't matter." Feng Na sighed and said, "Don't say that. Chris and I are friends. Of course I should help her with this little favor. Not to mention the travel expenses. Do I look like someone who is short of money?" Speaking of this, Feng Na's heart skipped a beat and she said tentatively, "If you really want to thank me, why don't you invite me to work in your shop? It can also solve my re-employment problem." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Your re-employment problem? You lost your job?" Feng Na smiled bitterly and said, "I'm going to graduate soon. Won't I still be unemployed?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and thought to himself, Feng Na is warm, kind, and meticulous. She is suitable to be a manager. In the future, I'll leave this shop to Chaner and let her be the owner and manage the money. Feng Na will be the shopkeeper and be in charge of the specific operations. Thinking of this, Li Yundong smiled and said, "Well, it just so happens that I need a manager in my shop. It couldn't be better if you came." Feng Na was overjoyed and cheered, but she soon said with a smile, "Can you bring an assistant?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Is it Ching Ching? All right, bring it over. But she's the only one. I don't have a place to arrange for more." Feng Na giggled and said, "Yes, from today on you are my boss. Boss, you can't bully us good people." Feng Na giggled and hung up the phone. As soon as she put down the phone, Ching Ching, who was standing beside her, leaned over and said with an ambiguous look on her face, "Oh, not bad. You finally found a rich man?" Feng Na's eyes lit up. Feng Na nudged her soft waist with her elbow and said with a smile, "What do you think? I'm a good friend, right? I didn't forget to take you with me even when I found a rich man." Ching Ching laughed and said, "Nana, you are really capable. But why is Li Yundong looking for you? I've known him for a while, but I've never seen him take the initiative to call someone." The smile on Feng Na's face suddenly disappeared. She sighed and said, "Chris, John and Alba had an accident when they went to Mount Huangshan. John fell off a cliff and asked us to accompany Chris to help find them." Ching Ching was shocked and covered her mouth. "No way. Why didn't you call the police? Let the police and the locals help you find them." Feng Na also showed a puzzled expression. "I don't know. Li Yundong said not to call the police. Maybe he was afraid of getting into trouble." Ching Ching thought for a moment and said, "Then when are we going?" Feng Na stood up and began to tidy up the things on the desk. Now? Ching Ching was stunned. Now? You have a student council meeting to host this afternoon. Feng Na sneered. Screw the student council. What's the point of being in this lousy student council if you've found a new home? As she said this, she reached out her hand and lifted Ching Cheng's chin with a frivolous expression. She giggled and said, "Girl, from now on, you will follow me and live a good life." After saying that, she couldn't help but burst into laughter with Cheng Cheng. The two of them laughed and joked around in the classroom for a while. Noticing that everyone was looking at them strangely, Feng Na's expression changed. "Be serious," she said in a low voice. "Although we just heard good news, John falling off the cliff is not good news. If Li Yundong finds out that we are laughing like this, he will think that we are cold-blooded and heartless." Ching Ching rolled her eyes at Feng Na. "Isn't it all because of you? I think you're the one who can't control yourself." Feng Na was about to refute, but she suddenly saw Yen Hua walking in the corridor outside the classroom. She thought to herself, "I can't host this afternoon's student council meeting, so I might as well let Yen Hua do it. Although he is a little narrow-minded, he is still talented." Feng Na immediately rushed into the corridor and shouted at Yen Hua, "Yen Hua!" But at this time, Yen Hua was no longer the Yen Hua of the past. He kept his head down all the way as if he would walk in the shadows at any time. At this time, Yen Feng had not fully adapted to her new identity. After all, seizing the body of her nephew was completely different from seizing the body of others. Moreover, the pure Yuanyang qi in Yen Hua's body had been unable to integrate with her own Yuanyin qi, which made her fight against this qi almost all the time. Therefore, Yen Feng turned a deaf ear to Feng Na's shouts for a moment. Seeing Yen Hua walking away with his head down, Feng Na couldn't help but shout again, "Hey Yen Hua, she's calling you." At this time, Yen Hua suddenly understood. He turned his face, looked at Feng Na with a strange expression, and asked, "What's the matter?" Seeing Yen Hua's distant expression, Feng Na was suddenly displeased and thought to herself, "You're giving me a cold shoulder? Humph, I won't let you off easy." Feng Na's face also became serious and she said, "It's nothing. I just wanted to say hello." At this time, Yen Feng suddenly came to her senses and realized that her attitude was very abnormal. He immediately smiled very warmly and said, "Sorry, I was thinking about something just now." "What's the matter, senior sister?" As the saying goes, don't hit a smiling person. When Feng Na saw Yen Hua smiling apologetically, the anger in her heart immediately dissipated. Feng Na said with a smile, "Can you help me host this afternoon's meeting?" Yen Feng was stunned. "The afternoon meeting?" Feng Na smiled and said, "Yes, Li Yundong asked me to do him a favor, so I can't go. You can help me host it?" As soon as Yen Feng heard the three words Li Yundong, she immediately became vigilant. All the hair on her body almost stretched out like a radar. He asked, "Li Yundong? What did he want to see you for?" Feng Na sighed and said, "Alas, you will know this sooner or later." Do you still remember Chris, John, and Alba who joined our school student union a few days ago? The three of them went to Mount Huangshan yesterday, but John fell off the cliff. Chris wants to find his whereabouts, but Li Yundong can't get away by himself, so he asked me to accompany him. Yen Feng's expression didn't change at all, but in her heart, a storm was suddenly set off. It could be said that the Battle of Tiandu Peak of Mount Huangshan had spread throughout the cultivation world overnight. Although Yen Feng had been hiding it, Heat was not isolated. Naturally, he also knew the news. Especially when he'd heard that Li Yundong had asked Feng Na to accompany Chris to Mount Huangshan. He immediately had an idea and said with a smile, "You want to accompany Chris to Mount Huangshan? Can I go too?" Feng Na was stunned. You will go? What about the afternoon meeting?" Yen Feng smiled and said, "I'm not the only vice president. Let the others go." Feng Na knew that Yen Hua and Li Yundong usually had a lot of dirty dealings, and at this time he was so eager to volunteer. For a moment, she muttered in her heart. Seeing this, Yen Feng immediately smiled and said, "Sister, John is an exchange student of our school. If something happens to him, it's only right for me to help. Besides, you are all girls. If there is any safety problem and you meet some bad people, what should you do? I am a boy after all and I can protect you. Even if you don't meet bad people when the time comes, you will definitely have to ask the local people for help. It's not convenient for you to do some things, but it's convenient for me. What do you think?" Feng Na was shaken by Yen Feng's words. She thought for a moment and smiled. "You are really eloquent. What you said makes sense. Well, let's go together." Yen Feng was overjoyed and said with a smile, "When are we going?" Feng Na smiled and said, "Now. I'll go back and pack my things. See you at the school gate." Yan Feng watched Feng Na turn around and enter the classroom, walking in the direction of the student dormitory with Cheng Cheng. The smile on his face became gloomy little by little, and a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Chapter 587. After the tragic battle of Tiandu Peak, although the heaven's retribution caused by Su Ling did not descend, it began to rain heavily the next day. The entire Mount Huangshan was shrouded in raindrops the size of beans. The sky was dark as if covered with a pot lid. From time to time, bolts of lightning would jump out of the thick dark clouds as if they were warning the world. Go to the internet. 7 km. On the path of Mount Huangshan, Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school raised her head. Her eyes were full of awe and yearning for the lightning in the sky. Zhou Ping, who was following closely behind her, saw her stop and couldn't help asking, "Master, what's wrong?" Zhang Ling sighed and said, "Spring is coming, and it's time to go through the thunder retribution again." Zhou Ping held a bamboo umbrella and asked in confusion, "Master, why are you suddenly so emotional?" Zhang Ling shook her head slightly. "The Battle of Tiandu Peak happened so suddenly that even we didn't get the news. Unexpectedly, after this battle, Li Yundong, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and that little fox spirit enjoyed 3 Diyuan Jindan alone. Alas. Good luck. The Jinshan phase is the biggest bottleneck for cultivators. As long as they can break through this bottleneck, the thunder retribution is only a matter of time. After passing the thunder retribution, they can directly cultivate to the 9th heaven." Zhang Ling let out a long sigh and said in a lonely and bitter tone, "I have cultivated for decades, but I have never been able to break through to the Jinshan phase. Li Yundong has only cultivated for more than half a year, but he has already broken through to the Jinshan phase. This spring is the best time to go through the thunder retribution. At that time, I wonder how many people in the cultivation world will challenge the power of heaven and go through the thunder retribution? Will Li Yundong be among them?" Although Zhou Ping had a grudge against Li Yundong, thinking of Li Yundong's rapid progress in cultivation, Zhou Ping was also secretly afraid. She said softly, "Master, even if he has cultivated to the Jinshan phase, he can't go through the thunder retribution so quickly. Even the sect master had to endure for nearly 10 years. Zhang Ling shook her head. "That's not necessarily true. This guy's luck is too good, so good that it's amazing." As she spoke, Zhang Ling turned her head and looked at Zhou Ping with bright eyes. She said in a deep voice, "Do you know why I brought you here?" Zhou Ping shook her head. "I don't know. I was wondering why you came here when the fight was over." Zhang Ling smiled and said, "I'm not the only one. In fact, many sects have sent people down secretly. They are searching all over the mountains and plains." Zhou Ping was stunned, but she soon understood. "The Medicine King tripod?" Zhang Ling nodded. "That's right. When Wan Jinyuan left, he only took 1 Diyuan Jindan with him. He didn't even have time to take the Medicine King tripod with him. After the Battle of Tiandu Peak, the Medicine King tripod disappeared, and I haven't heard that other cultivators have taken it away. If no one has gotten it, I believe it is near Mount Huangshan. If we are lucky, we may be able to find it." Zhou Ping was happy at first, but then she said with some frustration, "So what if we find it? Can he refine another Diyuan Jindan?" Zhang Ling sneered, "You pig head. It's not important whether we can refine it or not. What's important is to make sure that no one else can refine it, understand?" Zhou Ping suddenly understood and said, "So that's how it is. Master, you are so powerful. You are far-sighted and scheming." Zhang Ling snorted. "Don't flatter me. Besides, if Wan Jinyuan can refine Diyuan Jindan, why can't we? What the Gizao sect can do, why can't our Jingyi school? Although the Gizao sect is second to none among the external alchemy sects, our Jingyi school also has many experts who are good at refining elixirs. My shitty Zhang Kongyun is one of them." Zhou Ping thought of Zhang Kongyun's sloppy appearance as a vegetable farmer and couldn't help frowning. "Is he a master of alchemy?" Zhang Ling laughed and said, "You can't tell, can you? I've told you many times not to judge a book by its cover. There are many things he's good at." As the two of them talked, they searched around with sharp eyes. Suddenly, Zhou Ping's eyes swept over and saw a vague figure on a cliff. Zhou Ping pointed and said in surprise, "Master, look, there's someone." Zhang Ling looked over and saw a figure hanging on a pine tree on the cliff. She turned her head and said to Zhou Ping, "Go and see what's going on." Zhou Ping nodded. In an instant, her yang spirit went out of her body and wandered around the man. Then she quickly returned to her body and said, "Master, it's a foreigner. He seems to have fallen off a cliff and is unconscious now. Should we save him?" Zhang Ling was stunned. "A foreigner? Maybe he's a foreign tourist who has lost his footing. Let's save him and see if he's still alive." Zhou Ping responded and flew out again. When she flew back, the young spirit was carrying a burly man with blonde hair and blue eyes. It was Hardadef who had fallen off the cliff. Zhang Ling bent down and checked his pulse on his neck. She smiled and said, "He's not dead yet. He's really lucky." Zhou Ping's young spirit returned to her body. She also checked Hardadef's pulse, but she frowned and said, "But master, he's almost out of breath. What should we do? Should we use our luck to save him?" Zhang Ling thought for a moment, sighed slightly and said, "There's no need for luck. Mount Huangshan is not Mount Longhu, and this is not the territory of our Jingyi school. The Buddhists and other Taoist sects are very powerful here. It's not appropriate for us to waste our Jinchi. Let's use the resurrection pill to save him." Zhou Ping was slightly shocked. "Master, using the resurrection pill to save a foreigner? This is too wasteful, isn't it?" Zhang Ling shook her head, saluted with one hand and said, "You can't say that. As the saying goes, God has the virtue of cherishing life. It's rare that he didn't die after falling off the cliff. This is God's will and it can't be violated. You are also a cultivator. Have you done all your homework in vain?" Although Zhou Ping was a little reluctant, she still took out a small purple-blue porcelain bottle from her bosom and poured out a golden thumb-sized pill from it. She pinched Hardadef's cheeks and stuffed the pill into his mouth while muttering, "You're lucky. This is a life-saving elixir that is hard to find even with 1,000 pieces of gold. You can actually eat one. I haven't even tasted it before." Zhang Ling couldn't help laughing. "Do you want to try it? It's simple. You can also jump down from the mountain and have a taste." Zhou Ping stood up and said with a smile, "Master, I was just saying. I just feel that it's a pity to use such a good elixir to save a foreigner." Zhang Ling didn't comment. She stared at Hardadef with bright eyes, only to see that his pale face was gradually becoming a little rosy. Suddenly she felt that Hardadef's face was a little familiar, so she said to Zhou Ping, "Push his hair aside and take a look." At this time it was raining heavily, and Hardadef had fallen from the cliff. His hair was very messy and even his forehead and eyes were covered. After Zhou Ping pushed his hair aside, she was also surprised and said, "Master, he looks so familiar." Then Zhou Ping suddenly said, "Ah, I remember. I seem to have seen him at the Taoist assembly. This guy chased after Li Yundong to become his disciple, right?" Zhang Ling suddenly sneered. "Li Yundong again. If I had known, I wouldn't have saved him." Zhou Ping immediately said, "Master, why don't I push him down again?" Zhang Ling immediately glared at her and said, "Are you crazy? How can you say such a thing? Let's go. It's his fate to be saved. I just hope that he won't follow Li Yundong and go against us in the future." After that, she flicked her sleeves and left unhappily. Seeing her leave, Zhou Ping looked back at Hardadef unwillingly and shouted, "Master, wait for me." Then she chased after him. The two of them walked along the path, and as soon as they stepped onto the ropeway, they saw a few people walking towards them. The woman in the lead was blonde, tall, and beautiful. She was also an extremely beautiful Western woman. Behind her stood a round-faced beauty and a big-breasted beauty. Behind the two beauties stood a rather handsome boy. They were none other than Chris, Feng Na, Ching Cheng, and Yen Feng. Behind them were a few locals who kept pointing at them. Feng Na was holding a small umbrella and looking around carefully. She saw Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping coming from the opposite side of the ropeway. As soon as she opened her mouth, she asked loudly, "Hello, have you seen a foreigner with blonde hair and blue eyes?" As she said this, she handed over a photo of Hardadef that she had prepared. Zhang Ling had inadvertently saved Hardadef, who was related to Li Yundong. She was unhappy. When she saw that the photo in Feng Na's hand was of Hardadef, she immediately sneered and said angrily, "I've never seen him before." As she spoke, she swept past them with Zhou Ping. Feng Na looked at their backs with her mouth agape and was speechless for a moment. She muttered in a low voice, "If you haven't seen him, then so be it. Why are you so angry?" Ching Ching whispered, "Well, Nana, don't argue with them. Let's look around again. It should be this area, right? Chris was looking around anxiously. When she heard Ching Cheng's words, she nodded and said, "Hardadef fell around here, but we just looked for him at the foot of the mountain, but we didn't see him. We don't know whether he is alive or dead. It's really worrying." Feng Na comforted her. Chris, the residents nearby also said that there are many trees here. It's possible that he was caught by that tree. Hardedef is a lucky man. He should be fine. While she was speaking, she saw Yen Fang turn her head and stare at Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling, who were leaving. There was a faint sneer at the corner of her mouth. Feng Na asked curiously, Yen Hua, what are you looking at? Yen Fang turned her face to hide her gaffe. Heat smiled and said, nothing. I just think they are a little strange. Why did they come to Mount Huangshan on such a rainy day? Feng Na smiled and said, what's so strange about that? What are you doing in Mount Huangshan? Don't look around. Look carefully. Yen Fang smiled slightly and stopped talking. Finally, she quickly glanced in the direction of Zhang Ling's departure and thought to herself, humph, they are all looking for the Medicine King tripod. I wonder if they have found it. Chris and the others searched along the ropeway but found nothing. Feng Na stood on the path halfway up the mountain in a daze and said, it's not a good way to go on like this. Maybe we should spread out and look around? Then give a shout and perhaps John will hear us if he is awake. Chris smiled bitterly and said, this is the only way. I will look along the east side and you can look in other directions. Feng Na nodded. She turned to Yen Fang and said, Yen Hua, where are you going to look? Yen Fang had no intention of looking for people with them at all. The reason why Heat came to Mount Huangshan with Feng Na was that Heat wanted to spy on the situation here after the Battle of Tiandu Peak, especially to find the whereabouts of the Medicine King tripod. Secondly, Yen Fang had learned through his own channels that Chris had also obtained the divine chi of elixir and wanted to find an opportunity to change his body. Since Yen Fang had occupied his nephew's body, although he had changed from a 5-leak body to a 7-treasure body, his strength had not increased but decreased. Especially when he was cultivating, there would always be a strong sense of guilt in his heart. Moreover, the Yuanyang Qi in Yen Hua's body and his own Yuanyin Qi would always cause a violent conflict, which would cause his cultivation to regress. Yen Fang smiled and said to Feng Na, Chris is unfamiliar with this place. I'm afraid she will be in danger. I'd better stay with her. Feng Na thought for a moment and said with a smile, well, let's split up first and meet here in an hour. They discussed for a while and then dispersed. Chris didn't know that she had been stared at by Yen Fang. On the contrary, she smiled gratefully at Yen Fang and said, thank you very much. You are really a gentleman. Yen Fang put on a fake smile and said meaningfully, you don't have to thank me. I'm not a gentleman. Chris knew that Chinese people were modest. She thought that this was Yen Fang's modesty. She smiled politely at Yen Fang and said, where should we start looking? Yen Fang intended to guide Chris to a place where there were few people. Heat pointed casually and said, let's go there. Seeing that Yen Fang was pointing to a mountain path, Chris hesitated for a moment, but she quickly nodded and said, okay, let's go there. Then she walked forward. Yen Fang walked behind Chris, staring at her like a hunter watching his prey walk into a trap. There was a faint sneer at the corner of his mouth. The two of them walked for a while. Yen Fang saw that there were lush green pines and trees all around. There was no trace of people around. It was obviously a good place to kill people. Heat sneered in his heart. Just as he was about to step forward and make a move, he suddenly heard Chris cry out in alarm. Then she ran forward like crazy and shouted, John, is that you? John. Sorry it's late. There will be another chapter in a while. Chapter 588. Chris couldn't believe that she had found Hardedef again when she was about to give up all hope. She ran forward ecstatically, completely unaware that she had just brushed shoulders with the god of death. Go to the internet. Yen Fang frowned slightly and took back her outstretched hand. She also showed a hint of surprise and trotted forward. Heat wanted to confirm whether Hardedef was still alive. Heat could not allow another uncontrollable factor to appear while he was changing his soul. Chris saw Hardedef lying on the mountain path, covered with scratches and bruises. She quickly squatted down and checked Hardedef's breath. She immediately felt a burst of warmth coming from her fingertips. Chris was overjoyed and cheered, thank God he's still alive. As she spoke, she stood up in ecstasy and hugged Yen Fang, who had just tried to kill her. Yen Fang also hugged her with a smile, but she looked over Chris's shoulder at Hardedef in bewilderment. He asked tentatively, are you sure he's all right? Chris was so happy that tears flowed from her eyes. She smiled and said, hurry up and send him to the hospital. If we delay any longer he might be in trouble. While she was speaking, she heard Hardadef suddenly moan and whisper, "Water." Chris quickly searched her body but she exclaimed, "Damn it, the water is all with Feng Na." She quickly said to Yen Feng, "You stay here and look after him. I'll call Feng Na." But she took out her mobile phone and dialed the number, but because the signal in the mountainous area was not good, she couldn't get through. Chris had no choice but to look at Yen Feng. Yen Feng seemed to know what she wanted to say, so she rushed to say, "I'll look after him. You go find Feng Na and bring her the good news." Chris didn't doubt her words. She smiled happily, nodded hard and turned to leave. Yen Feng watched Chris leave, and the smile on her face became gloomy little by little. Heats gritted his teeth and looked at Hardadef, cursing in a low voice, "Damn it. Why did I find you at this time? Damn it, why aren't you dead yet?" Yen Feng looked at Hardadef with hatred in her eyes. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Heej bent down slightly and whispered, "There is still the smell of the resurrection pill of morality in your body. Who saved you? Was it Zhongling? If this fellow is really meddlesome, why doesn't he just let you die? Do you know how hard it is for me to find a good body? Do you know how badly I was forced by Li Yundong?" Yen Feng's face was twisted and she cursed everything like a demon. "Look at me now. I'm neither a man nor a woman. I don't look like a human nor a ghost." Even his cultivation had regressed a lot. "Damn it, why do you foreigners have such good lives? Not dead even after falling off a cliff? Why was Chris so lucky? She could actually absorb divine elixir chi. Damn it. Li Yundong, this bastard, is helping the wicked. Why does God help him? Why?" Yen Feng's low roar echoed in the jungle like a devil's howl. Her eyes were shining with a fierce light, but suddenly she saw Hardadef's eyelids tremble slightly. The blonde and blue-eyed foreigner struggled to open his eyes and said, "My master, he is a good person." This sentence was ordinary, but in Yen Feng's ears, it was no less than a thunderbolt striking him. Yen Feng was so frightened that she suddenly stood up and took 2 steps back. She looked at Hardadef in shock and stammered, You're awake? What did you hear? You heard it all?" Hardadef struggled to open his eyes and said intermittently, "I heard what you said. You misunderstood my master, Heech." Yen Feng didn't hear a single word of Hardadef's next words clearly. For a moment, his mind was buzzing and fear and panic drowned his soul. Yen Feng had never thought that her cultivation would have regressed to the point that she couldn't even detect whether the person in front of her was awake or not. But what was even more frightening was that Hardadef had actually heard her words. This meant that her identity had been exposed. Although she could change her body again, how could it be so easy? Whose body could she take? Chris. What if she came back and Hardadef told her what she had just said? Take Hardadef's body? This foreigner's yang qi was even stronger than Yen Hua's. Moreover, even if she took Hardadef's body, what about Yen Hua's body? Where could she hide it? How could she explain his whereabouts? Could she adapt to this foreigner's words, deeds and habits? At least she knew Yen Hua, but what about this foreigner? For a moment, the expression on Yen Feng's face kept changing. She went from panic to fear, from fear to anger, and from anger to murderous intent. Why did Li Yundong's cultivation advance by leaps and bounds and become stronger and stronger, while she always had to run around like a stray dog? Her cultivation was getting weaker and weaker? What? The more Yen Feng thought about it, the more evil thoughts grew in her heart. She stared at Hardadef viciously and thought to herself, it would be great if this guy died. Although Hardadef was seriously injured at this time, his survival instinct was still there. The threat and premonition of death still existed in his natural instinct. Seeing that the murderous intent in Yen Feng's eyes was getting stronger and stronger, he was suddenly shocked and subconsciously wanted to turn around and run away. But at this time, Yen Feng suddenly laughed grimly, stepped forward quickly, and slapped Hardadef's head. Hardadef was also a martial arts practitioner for many years. Although he was seriously injured at this critical moment of life and death, all his potential was stimulated. He subconsciously tilted his body and dodged the fatal blow. His shoulder was suddenly hit by Yen Feng's palm, and his body flew out like a kite with a broken string. Soon he rolled down the steep hillside. Yen Feng stared at Hardadef, who was constantly rolling down the mountain. Heech sneered and said grimly, "After being hit by my palm, all the bones in your body will be broken within 2 hours, let alone rolling down such a high mountain. If you don't die this time, it will be intolerable." Yen Feng looked in the direction where Hardadef had rolled down the cliff again. After a long time, Heech turned around and rearranged the scene, causing Hardedef to slip and fall. He himself dodged to the side and quietly waited for Chris, Feng Na, and the others to come back. But what Yen Fang didn't know was that when Hardedef rolled down the steep hillside, he was lucky that his head didn't hit the rocks on the mountain. When he rolled to the foot of the mountain and stopped, he heard a clear girl's voice. "Oh, someone has fallen, master." When Hardedef heard this voice, he only had time to shout for help with the last bit of strength in his body before he immediately fainted. At this time, a pretty little girl walked over to the unconscious Hardedef. This girl was none other than Zhang Lufang, the youngest shimi of the Jingyi school, who had followed Zhou Ping to participate in the Taoist assembly. Zhang Lufang walked over to Hardedef curiously and saw that the foreigner's face was swollen and bruised. She squatted down to check Hardedef's pulse, then turned to an old man dressed as a farmer behind her and said, "Master, it's a foreigner. It seems that he's still breathing. Hey, he smells of the resurrection pill of our Jingyi school. It's so strange. Who gave it to him?" Zhang Kongyun walked over unhurriedly with a cane. He narrowed his eyes and glanced at Hardedef, then sighed and said, "If I'm right, it should be eldest Shiji Zhangling who saved him." "Is eldest Sherboy here too?" Zhang Lufang asked curiously with her eyes wide open. Zhang Kongyun stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Of course. Even I am looking for the Medicine King tripod. How can she not look for it?" Zhang Lufang blinked a few times, pointed to Hardedef at her feet and said, "Master, should we save him?" Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "Alas, eldest Shiji even gave him the resurrection pill. Obviously he was seriously injured before he fell off the cliff. Now he's even more injured. Hey, he seems to have been hit by a palm? Let me see." Zhang Kongyun bent down and checked Hardedef's pulse. He immediately frowned and said, "This auruk. It seems to be the Shenmen Qi of our Jingyi school. It can't be. Could it be eldest Shiji?" Zhang Lufang was also tongue-tied and said, "Could it be that eldest Sherboy accidentally hurt him? And then she gave him the resurrection pill?" Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "Impossible. Eldest Shiji is proud and conceited. Although she is a little hot-tempered, protective and stubborn, she is not a bad person. She would not do such a heartless thing." Zhang Lufang looked at Hardedef sympathetically and said, "This man is so miserable. He actually fell off the cliff twice. And he didn't die twice. Master, can you save him?" Zhang Kongyun scratched his beard in embarrassment. He frowned and said, "This man has already taken the resurrection pill of morality before. Obviously he has already been injured. Now he is seriously injured by the palm force and the fall from the cliff. His injuries are getting worse and worse. Even God can't save him." Zhang Lufang was greatly disappointed. "Master, even you can't save him?" Zhang Kongyun thought for a moment and said, "I can only give it a try, but the result depends on his own luck." Zhang Lufang smiled and said, "Master, just give it a try. Anyway, no one will know that you did it if you fail." Zhang Kongyun glared at her and pretended to be angry. Don't jinx it." As he spoke, he rolled up his sleeves, took out a golden needle from his cuff, and quickly pierced it into the Baihui acupoint on the top of Hardedef's head. Zhang Kongyun's movements were fast and steady. With a pinch of his fingers, the 3-inch-long golden needle was completely inserted, leaving only a little bit of the end. Zhang Liufang's eyes widened and she looked at Zhang Kongyun nervously. She saw her master shake the golden needle with his fingers and then quickly pull it out. Before long, Hardedef's eyelids trembled slightly and he opened his eyes. Well, I promised to make up for the next chapter, but I was urged to sleep by the leader. I can only upload the second chapter for today and finish the rest of the chapters tomorrow. I'll upload them as soon as possible so that I can be relieved. Chapter 589. Seeing that Hardedef had woken up, Zhang Lufang clapped her hands and said with a smile, You're awake. Master, you're really amazing." Zhang Kongyun proudly put away the golden needles, stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Of course." Zhang Lufang squatted down and shouted at John, "Hey big nose. How did you get hurt? Who hurt you?" But Hardedef looked at her with a confused face. After a while, he suddenly smiled and stammered, Master. Zhang Lufang was shocked. She reached out and patted Hardedef's face saying, "Hey, wake up. I'm not your master." Hardedef was still smiling foolishly. Master is a good person." Zhang Lufang turned her head and looked at Zhang Kongyun helplessly. "Master, did you make him an idiot?" Zhang Kongyun's face was full of embarrassment. He glared at Zhang Lufang angrily and stammered, "Nonsense. How could I possibly make him an idiot? Is my golden needle crossing calamity skill just for show?" Zhang Lufang said suspiciously, "Oh? Then how did he become like this?" Seeing that his disciple was doubting his authority, Zhang Kongyun was so angry that he blew his beard and glared at him. He said, "It must be because this guy's qi is in disorder which caused his upper dantian to be in disorder. That's why he lost his mind and became a fool." Zhang Lufang looked helplessly at Hardadef, who kept giggling and sighed, "Master, what should we do? Leave him here?" Zhang Kongyun sighed and said, "Forget it, take him back. I'll go back and mix some medicine for him to see if it can cure him. Watch net." Zhang Lufang blinked her eyes and said with a smile, Okay, someone can play with me now, although this guy is a bit silly. However, it's still better than some old man who grows vegetables all day long." Zhang Kongyun rolled his eyes, flicked his sleeves and said, "Then you are responsible for carrying him, I don't care." After saying that, he swaggered away. Zhang Lufang hurriedly shouted a few times, but she saw that Zhang Kongyun had walked far away in the blink of an eye without looking back. She stamped her feet angrily and said angrily, "You're so annoying. How can you let a little girl like me carry such a big man on her back? Bah, he stinks." Zhang Lufang pinched her nose and chased after Zhang Kongyun with the giggling Hardadef on her back. The two of them soon walked out of the scenic area. When they were about to leave, Zhang Kongyun suddenly saw a group of villagers at the foot of the mountain surrounding an arrogant villager with saliva flying everywhere. They were discussing something loudly, and the villager who was surrounded in the middle was waving a purple gold object high in his hand. Zhang Kongyun took a closer look and was shocked. He thought, "Is this the Medicine King tripod?" Zhang Kongyun immediately stepped forward and took a look outside the crowd. Sure enough, he saw that everyone was looking at the purple tripod in the villager's hand with admiring eyes. This tripod was exuding a strange fragrance and was exquisitely carved. What was more amazing was that it was surrounded by a layer of white mist, as if it were an immortal item. If this wasn't the Medicine King tripod, then what was it? Zhang Kongyun was shocked. He immediately squeezed in and said, "Old fellow, you're medicine. Are you selling this tripod?" The villager immediately looked at him warily and snorted. "Of course I'm selling it. Why not?" Zhang Kongyun was overjoyed. "How much? I'll buy it." The villager laughed and said, "That's hard to say. Just now Wang Er, who lives next door, suggested that I take it to the auction house and sell it to the highest bidder." Zhang Kongyun was shocked. You want to auction the medicine? This tripod?" The villager said proudly, "Of course. This thing is a treasure at first glance. It will definitely fetch a good price." Zhang Kongyun tentatively asked, "I'll pay 200,000 yuan to buy this thing in your hand now. Will you sell it?" The villager snorted and hugged the Medicine King tripod tightly. He sneered and said, "Someone just bought it for 500,000 yuan. I didn't sell it, and you still want to pay 200,000 yuan? Zhang Kongyun frowned and thought, "Someone has already taken action?" Zhang Kongyun quickly raised two fingers and said, "Then I'll pay 2 million yuan to buy it now. Will you sell it?" As soon as he said this, there was an uproar around. 2 million yuan was not a small number. The villager was stunned. 2 million yuan? His eyes suddenly showed a strong desire, but he quickly gritted his teeth and said, "No." Zhang Kongyun immediately said, "Then 3 million yuan?" There was another exclamation around. Bubble, Under's first post at this time. The villager laughed and said, "It looks like a treasure. I won't sell it. I'll buy it at the auction." Zhang Kongyun stared at the villager for a long time, gritting his teeth in hatred. He shook his head helplessly and retreated from the crowd. Zhang Lufang snorted and said, "Just grab it. He won't sell it for 3 million yuan. Does he only care about money?" Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "Nonsense. There are so many secular mortals here. Do you want to rob it? How do you deal with the consequences? Not to mention whether it will alarm the government if other sects find out. Aren't you afraid of being ridiculed? We are the Jingyi school." Zhang Lufang carried Hardadef on her back and looked at the villager who was still showing off in the field in disappointment. "What should we do?" Zhang Kongyun sighed and said, "Since he wants to auction it, he can't run away anyway. We'll go back and find someone to keep an eye on him. If someone wants to rob it, we'll wait for him to get it and then we'll rob him. If no one wants to rob it, we'll see who is richer at the auction." Zhang Liufang's worry turned into joy. "That's right. Is our Jingyi school short of money? However, Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, that's not necessarily true. If the cultivation world knows that the Medicine King tripod has been auctioned, it will definitely turn the world upside down. At that time there will be another storm. As he said this, he sighed and said, let's go. This trip was not in vain. Finally, we know the whereabouts of the Medicine King tripod. Just as Zhang Kongyun was about to return to Mount Longhu with Zhang Lufang and the dumbfounded Hardadef, Chris, Feng Na, and Cheng Cheng were overjoyed and rushed to where Hardadef had been. But when Chris arrived at the place again, she found that Hardadef had already disappeared. Chris suddenly became anxious and shouted around like an ant on a hot pan, Hardadef! Hardadef! Feng Na looked around and asked sympathetically, is it here? Chris stamped her feet and said anxiously, it's here. I remember it clearly. By the way, Yin Hua said that he would help look after Hardadef. Where is he? Feng Na comforted her softly, Chris, don't worry. Maybe Yin Hua took Hardadef to another place. However, Chris said anxiously, Hardadef is so badly injured. How can he be moved? Ching Ching, who was standing to one side, had sharp eyes. She saw a person coming out of the jungle. It was Yen Fang, so she quickly pointed and said, hey, he's here. Chris immediately rushed to Yen Fang and said anxiously, Yen Hua, what are you doing? Yen Fang looked as if nothing had happened. He smiled and said, I went to the toilet. What's wrong? What happened? Chris looked frightened, and an ominous thought flashed through her mind. She said in a trembling voice, what? You went to the toilet? Hardadef isn't with you? The smile on Yin Fang's face slowly froze. He pretended to be surprised and said, what's wrong with Hardadef? What happened? Chris's heart sank bit by bit. She only felt that her hands and feet were cold. She said, damn it, Hardadef couldn't have. As she said this, she immediately rushed to the edge of the cliff and looked down with wide eyes. However, the slope of Mount Huangshan was steep. Although it was halfway up the mountain, the forest at the foot of the mountain was dense. Even an army might not be able to find it, let alone a person. The more Chris looked at it, the colder her heart became. The more she thought about it, the more flustered she became. Cheng Cheng suddenly pointed at Chris's feet and said, hey, look. Chris and the others looked in the direction Cheng Cheng was pointing, only to see a few indistinguishable footprints beside the cliff, and the weeds next to them were also very messy. Chris's heart suddenly trembled and she said in fear, could it be? Yen Fang saw that everyone was guessing according to his plan. She was overjoyed, but her face was full of fear. Did Hardadef roll down just now? Her words made everyone's heart skip a beat. Chris knelt down beside the cliff. She remembered that Hardadef had fallen off the cliff in order to save her. She had found him with great difficulty and found that he was not dead, but he had still not been able to escape the claws of death. For a moment, Chris was so sad that she burst into tears. Yen Fang also looked sorrowful and remorseful and said repeatedly, it's all my fault. I should have kept an eye on him. I shouldn't have left. Seeing Yen Fang constantly blaming herself, Feng Na also sighed and said, it's not certain now. Yen Hua, you don't have to blame yourself too much. Let's hurry down the mountain and look for him again. After she finished speaking, Chris immediately stood up and ran down the mountain like crazy. After they arrived at the foot of the mountain, even with the help of the locals, they were still unable to find Hardadef's whereabouts. The only local who had seen Hardadef lived on the other side of the mountain and had not been able to meet Chris and the others. After searching for a long time, seeing that it was almost night, Chris and the others finally gave up. After leaving their contact information with the locals, they set off on their journey back to Tianan City. Along the way, Chris's heart was heavy. After saying goodbye to Feng Na, she returned to Li Yundong's residence. But just as Chris entered the building, she saw Ling Yu arguing loudly with two men in suits at the door. The two men in suits were kneeling at the door, their backs straight, blocking the door tightly. One of the men pressed his hands on his knees and said loudly in Chinese, I'm Sanji Tsunakatsu of Jinyan Tantrism. I came to see leader Li Yundong on the order of Masako Tachibana. Please introduce me. Make up for the missing chapter, and today's two updates are still the same. Chapter 590. Obviously, it was not the first time that Ling Yu of the Fox Zen School had dealt with this man. She said angrily, I told you that our leader is in seclusion. Can't you keep your voice down? Sanji Tsunakatsu stared at her and said, seclusion? In a place like this? Do you think we are all fools? Ling Yu said angrily, Do you care where our leader is in seclusion? Even if he is in seclusion here, what does it have to do with you? There was a flash of anger in Xianji's eyes, but he suppressed it and said, I will never leave until I see Leader Li Yundong. A man next to him also said in a loud voice, We want to see Leader Li Yundong. Please introduce us. The little foxes behind Ling Yu also came over one after another and said, Why are you two so annoying? I said that the leader is in seclusion. Why are you always shouting? What on earth is the matter that makes you so anxious? Can't you wait a few days? Xianji Tsunekatsu said, Masako Tachibana sent me to deliver a letter and made an appointment with him before the Okunin, but Leader Li Yundong did not reply to me. Ling Yu was shocked. She looked at Xianji Tsunekatsu up and down and said in surprise, Did you send it? At this time Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School heard the noise and came out one after another. Chao Yi saw two Japanese men blocking the door tightly. She couldn't help frowning and said, I can let the leader reply to you first. He has already received the letter. It's not certain whether he will go or not. Go to see the net. Bubble 8. Xianji Tsunekatsu couldn't help but say angrily, How can that be? Leader Li Yundong must go. Chao Yi frowned and said angrily, What? If he doesn't go, do you want to kidnap our leader? Xianji Tsunekatsu said loudly, A real cultivator should not retreat in the face of a challenge. He is timid and cowardly. When Ao Wushuang heard this, she couldn't help but come out and say coldly, Since you are a cultivator of Xinyan Tantrism, are you a warrior or a monk? Why do you speak so murderously? The Xinyan Tantrism that I know does not believe in such a murderous dogma. Xianji Tsunekatsu saw that Ao Wushuang was as beautiful as a peach and as cold as frost. Although she was extremely beautiful, she exuded a strong aura that could not be violated. He suddenly became a little more polite and said, The way we believe in is different from the way you believe in. Yuhan people believe in peace, but we Yamato people believe in martial arts. Therefore, in our opinion, martial arts is the Tao and the Tao is martial arts. It's shameful for sect leader Li Yundong to avoid the battle. He should be ashamed and commit suicide. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, When I went to the Kongabuji temple more than a decade ago, you weren't like this. How did you become like this now? Humph, before Li Yundong left, he asked me to temporarily exercise the power of the leader. I can make decisions for him. Let me tell you, although our sect leader is also a cultivator who values peace and is a broad-minded cultivator, he is not a person who can let any cat or dog ride on his neck. Go back and tell your Masako Tachibana that when he comes out of seclusion, he will definitely come to visit and let her know what a real strong person is. However, Xianji Tsunekatsu looked straight at Ao Wushuang and said stubbornly, No, I must wait for him here. Logically speaking, he should have set off immediately after receiving the letter. He has been delayed for 2 days. This is a great disrespect to Masako Tachibana and a disgrace to us. Ao Wushuang looked at him coldly and shook her head. You Japanese learn everything from others, but you don't learn anything like it. When our Chinese civilization was at its peak, your ancestor, Master Hongfa, specially crossed the ocean to our mainland to learn Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. But unfortunately, more than 1,000 years have passed, and you still haven't learned the essence of our Chinese civilization. Don't you know what it means to not do to others what you don't want to do to yourself? Are you willing to accept someone forcing you like this? Xianji Tsunekatsu also sneered and said, Our Yamato people only know that the winner is the king and the loser is the bandit. If sect leader Li Yundong doesn't dare to go, just say it. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Don't you think it's shameful to hide under the excuse of seclusion? This sentence made everyone in the Fox Zen school furious at the same time. Ling Yu and the little foxes scolded angrily, What did you say? Say it again if you dare. Will our leader be afraid of you? That's right. Our leader scared your Tachibana Wakako to tears with one palm. Do you still have the face to mention this matter? When Xianji Tsunekatsu heard their words, he was so angry that he gritted his teeth secretly. He knew very well that if Tachibana Wakako hadn't been so badly defeated this time, she wouldn't have lost her temper and ordered him to make sure that Li Yundong came to Japan no matter what. In fact, Xinyan Tantrism was like the Chinese Chuanzhen sect and Jingyi school. There were many sects under one sect. For example, there were Chuanzhen Dragon sect, Chuanzhen Green Cave sect, Chuanzhen Yushin sect, Chuanzhen Nanhua sect, and so on. And there were different schools under these sections. Compared with the Chinese cultivation world, which was full of disasters, Xinyan Tantrism was located in Kongabuji, and its incense had not been cut off for thousands of years. It was not like another sacred mountain in Japan, Mount Hai, which had been washed with blood by Oda Nobunaga and suffered a huge disaster. After more than 1,200 years of development, Xinyan Tantrism, which was founded by Hongfa in the beginning, was divided into Ono School and Hirazawa School. Ono School and Hirazawa School each gave birth to 6 schools, which were collectively known as the Nozawa 12 schools. As time went on, these 12 schools slowly gave birth to 36 schools and more than 70 schools. Most of these schools of Xinyan Tantrism could be classified into the School of Ancient Meaning and the School of New Meaning. They were also the 2 schools with the fiercest struggle with each other, just like the Niden School and the External Alchemy School in the Chinese cultivation world. In the Edo period of Japan, the School of Ancient Meaning occupied the ancestral court of Xinyan Tantrism, Mount Koya, while the School of New Meaning left Mount Koya under the exclusion of the School of Ancient Meaning and occupied Mount Ji and Mount Feng. After a long period of open and secret fighting, the School of Ancient Meaning and the School of New Meaning were scarred by each other. The cultivators of the 2 sects who could not bear the torture, reached an agreement under the mediation of the Emperor of Japan in the 5th year of Meiji. Mount Koya was initially set as the general base of the School of Ancient Meaning, and Mount Ji and Mount Feng were the general base of the School of New Meaning. The monks of the 2 sects and the 3 mountains were taking turns to serve as the chief steward of the Xinyan sect, leading all the temples of the Xinyan sect in the world. However, because both of the 2 sects wanted to hold the position of the chief steward of the Xinyan sect for a long time, the 2 sides began to fight openly and secretly again. The School of Ancient Meaning gradually gained the upper hand in the battle between the 2 sects by virtue of the awakening of the powerful bloodline power of the Masako family. Masako Tachibana also laughed proudly in the entire Japanese cultivation world in the 10 years of fighting. However, seeing that the quadrennial election ceremony for the chief steward was about to be held, in order to compete for this position, the 2 sects were working hard to build momentum among the people. At this critical moment, there was a scandal that Masako Tachibana's daughter, Tachibana Wakako, was frightened by a Chinese cultivator and cried. This was tantamount to throwing a heavy atomic bomb in the entire Japanese cultivation world. The School of New Meaning, which was originally hostile, immediately gloated and publicized it. Some of the other schools of Ancient Meaning also angrily questioned Masako Tachibana and raised questions. Sanji Tsunekatsu still clearly remembered that when Masako Tachibana was in the lobby of Okunin, she was besieged and questioned by the masters of many schools of Ancient Meaning. Her weak body was almost drowned. Although these schools all belonged to the School of Ancient Meaning, Masako Tachibana had occupied a high position for too long, which made other schools extremely jealous. Therefore, even within the School of Ancient Meaning, there were fierce battles and undercurrents surging. Under the discussion of the goddess Tachibana Wakako and the 413th great monk of Kangabuji Temple, Kaisai Hikaryuni, they agreed that since Li Yundong had brought them shame and disaster, they had to defeat him in front of all the people in the Japanese cultivation world. Only in this way could the current crisis be resolved. However, as the youngest and most promising monk of Kangabuji Temple, known as Chongqing Vajra, Sanji Tsunekatsu, came to Tiannan City with the heavy responsibility of Masako Tachibana on his shoulders. However, the letter of challenge he sent was like a clay ox sinking into the sea, and there was no news. Seeing that the quadrennial election ceremony of Japanese Xinyan Tantrism was about to begin, he couldn't even see Li Yundong. How could he not be anxious? In the face of the ridicule of the Fox Zen school, Sanji Tsunekatsu was anxious and angry. His eyes gradually revealed a fierce light, and his back slightly straightened, like a beast that was about to choose people to devour at any time. He thought to himself, Li Yundong is a coward. He doesn't dare to show up, so he let a group of women come out to be his shield. Damn it. Sanji Tsunekatsu clenched his fists and trembled with anger. He gritted his teeth and said, Tachibana Wakako is just a little more than 10 years old. What's there to be proud of when you beat her? If you have the ability to beat our Tachibana Wakako, then you are powerful. Ao Wushuang saw that he was so stubborn that it was almost impossible to communicate with him. She still wanted to speak, but Ling Yu said impatiently, Shu, don't talk to him. It's useless. I've told him many times that the leader is in seclusion, but he just won't listen. If he wants to kneel, let him kneel. At this time, Chris, who had been watching for a long time, finally couldn't help it. She stepped forward and said to Sanji Tsunekatsu, Li Yundong is indeed in seclusion. It's useless for you to urge him. Sanji Tsunekatsu turned his head and saw a blonde foreign woman speaking to him in fluent Chinese. He was stunned but replied in English, Who are you? Chris also replied in English, I'm Chris. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu asked, I mean, how can you be sure that Li Yundong is in seclusion? Chris said, I'm his registered disciple. Before I left, I saw him in seclusion. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu was shocked and immediately looked at Chris carefully. He recognized from Chris's accent that she was an American, but this American said that she was Li Yundong's disciple. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu said in surprise, You are his disciple? Chris shook her head and said, No, I'm just a registered disciple, not a disciple yet. For a moment, Sayanjit Tsunekatsu looked at Chris in a daze and couldn't speak for a long time. In the eyes of many Japanese, they were most afraid of the United States, but the one they despised and looked down upon the most was precisely China, which was separated from them by a strip of water and the source of their culture. But in the end, this American had become the disciple of the Chinese? It seemed that the American was begging to be his disciple, and this Li Yundong was hesitant to give her the status of a registered disciple? What was going on? Chris saw that Sayanjit Tsunekatsu did not speak, so she walked over to Ling Yu and the others and said to him, If you don't believe me, you can keep waiting, but please be quiet. Since the end of World War II, the Americans had always been the emperor of the Japanese people. Decades of national imprint had been deeply engraved in the bone marrow of the Japanese, making them feel that they were inferior to the Americans. Even the cultivators were no exception. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu's eyes widened as he watched Chris and the others enter the door, and then the door closed indifferently. For a moment he could not come back to his senses and was speechless. A young man on the side couldn't help but say anxiously, Changxing, what should we do now? Sayanjit Tsunekatsu calmed down and he quickly came back to his senses. He gritted his teeth and said, I don't believe he's not inside. I clearly saw him go in and never come out. With that, he quickly pinched a few fingers and snorted coldly, I don't believe that I can't force him out. I had something to do in the evening and came back very late. Sorry. Try to write another chapter, but it may be very late. Don't wait, maybe you will be urged to go to sleep in the middle of the code. If so, then you can only write the second chapter tomorrow morning. What a pity. Chapter 591. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu's hands quickly formed a seal. The ring and little fingers of both hands curled up, and the thumb, index finger and middle finger stretched out straight. The fingertips of both hands faced each other and pressed down on the ground. Junchi flowed all over his body, and soon a red cinnabar red dot appeared between his eyebrows. This red dot threw out a red light, just shining on the center point of the two fingers. Go to see the net. Bubble 8. In an instant, a flowing white mist appeared in the place where Sayanjit Tsunekatsu's fingers were framed. In the white mist, the scene of Chris, Ling Yu and others talking in the room clearly appeared. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu snorted coldly. With a turn of his mind, the white mist quickly changed into the scene of the room of Li Yundong and others inside. However, Sayanjit Tsunekatsu searched around, but he never found Li Yundong's figure. He was stunned and unwillingly searched another room. However, he searched around and almost searched all the rooms in the building, but he never found Li Yundong's figure. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu was shocked. He stayed where he was and looked at the man next to him, who was also stunned. He couldn't help saying, Tuki-kun, what should we do? Where did Li Yundong go? Tuki-kun was also stunned and said, Changxing, didn't we stare at the door and don't see him come out? Does he know how to make himself invisible? Sayanjit Tsunekatsu was a little annoyed and said, living in the busy city, what are you doing with this kind of shameful magic? Tuki-kun said with a face full of fear, Changxing, if we can't finish the task, what should we do? If Masako Tachibana blames us, then. Sayanjit Tsunekatsu's face was gloomy and his teeth were clenched. Tuki-kun suddenly said tentatively, Changxing, how about, we kidnap one of Li Yundong's men and force Li Yundong to go with us? Sayanjit Tsunekatsu immediately turned his head and scolded, Idiot! What kind of idea is this? Didn't you see that there was a woman who looked very powerful just now? Although I am sure that I can beat her and send the letter of challenge to their home without anyone knowing, I am not sure that I can take a living person away without anyone knowing. If there's a conflict and the local government is alerted, how are you going to deal with it? The monks of Xinyan Tantrism were divided into 16 ranks. Among them the great monk was the highest rank monk. His divine power and Buddhist dharma were extremely powerful and abnormal. At a young age, Sayanjit Tsunekatsu obtained the title of the 12th rank young monk. Not only was he allowed to wear a purple and gold kasaya, but his status and strength were far above that of Tuki, who was the 9th-rank monk. As soon as he scolded, Tuki's face immediately turned red. He did not dare to refute and repeatedly admitted his mistakes. Bubble -8 After Saionji Tsunekatsu scolded, his eyes flickered, and he was thinking of a way to deal with it, but the sound coming from his finger frame attracted his attention. After everyone from the Fox Zen School and Chris entered the room, Lingyu looked at Chris curiously and asked, "Has leader accepted you as a disciple?" Chris shook her head. "Just an in-name disciple." Lingyu agreed with Su Chan that Li Yundong shouldn't have accepted a foreign student as his disciple. However, she didn't want to question Li Yundong's decision, so she kept her doubts to herself. At this time, Chris was still thinking about the 2 Japanese at the door, so she asked, "Why have these 2 Japanese been guarding the door?" Lingyu curled her lips and said, "Leader beat their witch Tachibana Wakako to tears at the Taoist assembly. As a result, he beat the little one and provoked the big one. Tachibana Wakako's mother was not happy, so she wrote a letter of challenge and wanted to challenge leader. But leader has been in seclusion. How can he see him? Not to mention going to Japan with him." Chris asked curiously, "Seclusion?" Since she had witnessed all kinds of magical deeds from Li Yundong last time, she had gradually developed a strong interest in these magical secret skills of the East. After returning home, she had read a lot of related books, so she knew what seclusion meant. Chris looked around the room with more and more curiosity. She said in surprise, "Seclusion here? Are you kidding? Shouldn't seclusion be in a quiet place where no one will disturb you?" Lingyu looked at Chris in surprise and thought to herself, "This foreign devil speaks Chinese quite well, which is not bad. She even knows what seclusion means?" Lingyu was surprised and couldn't help laughing. "Of course not. This is the secular world and it's noisy. How can it be suitable for seclusion?" Chris asked in confusion, "Where did Li Yundong go? I heard from these 2 Japanese that they didn't see him go out." Lingyu laughed and said, "I can't tell you where he went. This is a secret. Otherwise, it would be bad if others found out where he was doing seclusion and went to disturb him. Moreover, these 2 Japanese are so stupid. They only know how to guard the main door. Don't they know that we almost never go through the main door?" Chris opened her mouth wide and asked in surprise, "Not through the main door? Then where?" Lingyu pointed to the balcony and laughed. "Don't you know that we Chinese like to go through the back door?" This sentence had a double meaning and was humorous. All the members of the Fox Zen School laughed. However, Chris didn't find it funny at all. She walked to the balcony with a strange look in her eyes, looked around and shook her head secretly. At this time, the little fox who had returned to the sofa, shouted to Lingyu, "Hey Lingyu Shiji, you're blocking me from watching TV. Hurry up and get out of the way." Lingyu and the little foxes had been watching TV before. After being harassed by Saionji Tsunekatsu, they put it down for a while. At this time, when she was reminded by her junior sister, she immediately sat aside excitedly and asked, "Which episode is it? Why is it the news? Who changed the channel? I don't want to watch the news. Change the channel, change the channel." Just as the little foxes were about to change the channel, they heard Chris suddenly shout in surprise, "Don't change it, don't change it. Look, what's this?" The little foxes first looked at Chris strangely, only to see her rush to the TV with a face full of excitement, pointing at it and shouting. Chris's strange behavior attracted everyone's attention. Even Ao Wushuang, who had always been indifferent, couldn't help but look back at her. But when Ao Wushuang saw it, she was so shocked that her whole body trembled and her eyes widened. On the TV screen that Chris was pointing at, a reporter was interviewing a man dressed as a villager. The man was holding a purple-gold 3-legged tripod furnace in his arms. The tripod furnace was surrounded by a white mist. At first glance, it was obvious that it was not an ordinary item. What else could it be if not the Medicine King tripod? Even though Ao Wushuang was used to great storms, she couldn't help but exclaim, "The Medicine King tripod?" As soon as everyone in the Fox Zen School heard the words Medicine King tripod, they all shivered. Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong both stared at the TV with their eyes wide open. The little foxes were even more shocked and said, "No way, a supreme powerful magical weapon for alchemy like the Medicine King tripod is actually on the news. What the hell is going on? How could such an important powerful magical weapon be picked up by this guy?" After the battle on Tiandu Peak, Chris had a very deep impression of the Diuan Jindan and the Medicine King tripod. In her opinion, it was because of these 2 mysterious Eastern treasures that a terrible battle had occurred, and her fate had been completely changed since then. Ling Yu stared at the Medicine King tripod with her eyes wide open and said in surprise, "Is this the powerful magical weapon of the legendary king of traditional Chinese medicine, Sun Simiao? So this is what it looks like." The little foxes also gathered in front of the TV, wishing they could stick their eyes on the TV screen. They carefully looked up and down at the legendary powerful magical weapon. For a moment they sighed and said, "Oh, the Medicine King tripod is so beautiful." Yes, this guy is holding the Medicine King tripod. Isn't he afraid of getting into trouble? Tut, you're so stupid. Didn't you see that he called all the reporters here? Now that it's exposed, everyone in the world will know that he has the Medicine King tripod. At that time, even the cultivators who want to kill him will be afraid. That's right, Shiji, you're so smart. The little foxes chattered. At this time the TV news switched back to an old expert. The old expert had silver hair and was seriously expressing his views and opinions on the cultural relics that the villager had picked up. When Ao Wushuang heard the expert use vague words to infer the origin of this cultural relic, she couldn't help but frown and whisper, "What are they going to do with such great fanfare?" She was full of doubts, but soon the picture changed back to the host. The host said, "Quan Jinsheng, a villager in the Huangshan scenic area of Anhui province, claims that this treasure is his family heirloom. On the first day someone offered a high price of 3 million yuan to buy it from him, but Quan Jinsheng refused. Now the villager says that he wants to auction the treasure, and only the highest bidder can get it." Hearing this, the people in the room suddenly burst into an uproar. Ling Yu said in surprise, "What? This person actually auctioned the Medicine King tripod? Isn't this too ridiculous? How much money would it cost to buy it?" Chao Yi also stamped her feet and said, "Damn it, leader is in seclusion and we can't tell him this news. What should we do?" At this time, almost everyone looked at Ao Wushuang and regarded her as the pillar at this time. Ao Wushuang pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Don't panic. Such a treasure will definitely not be auctioned in a short time. Even if we want to evaluate it, it will take some time. I hope that leader can come out of seclusion during this period of time." However, Ling Yu said with a sad face, "Oh, it's not easy for leader to come out of seclusion. We don't lack anything now but money. Where can we raise money for the auction? Should we sell the Desanxian store?" The other little foxes immediately shook their heads like a rattled drum. No, we won't have any pocket money if we sell it." Chao Yi also shook her head and said, "That shop won't be worth much even if we sell it. This Medicine King tripod will definitely be sold at a terrifying price. I'm afraid, it's not something we can afford." Chris was listening attentively. She suddenly said tentatively, "If you're short of money, I seem to have a little." You. Everyone's gaze shifted to Chris. Chris hesitated for a moment, but she quickly bit her lip and nodded firmly. "Well, I still have a few million." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. That was a few million. That's not a small number. It seems that leader has chosen a rich little woman as his disciple? However, Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, "A few million is not even enough to fill the gap between my teeth. If a powerful magical weapon like the Medicine King tripod is sold for a few million, then you really look down on our Chinese cultivators. Let alone others, the financial resources of Jingyi School, Chuanjin Dragon Sect, External Alchemy, and even other inconspicuous sects like the Jinshan sect are beyond our imagination." Chris said awkwardly, "But I only have this much. What should I do?" Ao Wushuang thought for a moment and said, "While the leader hasn't come out of seclusion, let's raise money first. I'll also think of a way to raise as much as I can. We can only take one step at a time. Let's do our best and leave it to fate." At this time Saionji Tsunekatsu, who was outside the door, heard this. He immediately stood up, and Tuki, who was next to him, also stood up and said angrily, "Damn it, we were guarding in front, but Li Yundong ran away from behind. Is he a rat?" However, Saionji Tsunekatsu's eyes flickered and he didn't answer him. After a long time he suddenly turned his head and said to Tuki, "Tuki, immediately report to Masako Tachibana that the alchemy supreme magical weapon of the Chinese cultivation world, the Medicine King tripod, has appeared. She will definitely be interested when she hears it. With the financial resources of our Xinyan Tantrism, if we participate in the auction, it will be easy. At that time, whether we take this powerful magical weapon for ourselves or lure Li Yundong to Mount Koya, I think he can no longer escape." When Tuki heard this, he was immediately overjoyed. "Changxing, this is a good idea. Killing two birds with one stone. He deserves to be the youngest and most promising young monk. Sanji Tsunekatsu snorted coldly and said, "Let's go. When the time comes, I want to see what kind of expression Li Yundong will have when he sees the supreme magical weapon of the Chinese cultivation world fall into our hands." After that, he sneered and left with a flick of his sleeve. At this time in Mount Tianlong of Dongwu City, thousands of miles away from Tianan City, Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin were just in the deepest closed-door meditation. Yesterday's second day. Chapter 592. Li Yundong left his home in Tianan City with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others and went to the secret room of the Fox Zen School of Mount Tianlong. However, because he had sealed the stone cave before, Li Yundong had to use the Fan of Seven Treasures to enter from the back door of Mount Tianlong. Go to the internet. 7 km. After entering the stone room of Mount Tianlong, although the surroundings were closed and the yin qi in the mountain was quite heavy, it was quiet and no one would disturb them. Therefore, Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others quickly entered meditation and cultivation. Unlike the last time when he was in a coma, Li Yundong took the initiative to mobilize the jinqi in his body and began to refine his yang spirit and niden according to the Taoist cultivation method. Li Yundong sat cross-legged in the center of the stone room where the mystical silver fox had left the heavenly Jindan technique. There was a futon under his feet. His body was straight and his head was flat, his tongue was on the upper jaw and his mind was empty. After a while the yang spirit went out of his body. At first, Li Yundong's yang spirit body was still the same as his own, but with the flow of Li Yundong's jinqi, the yang spirit continued to grow, and soon it became the appearance of Wisdom King's Fazhen with 3 heads and 6 arms. Li Yundong was in his own spirit space. While visualizing his Fazhen, he was thinking about cultivation. Especially when Li Yundong's cultivation realm was improving day by day, many things that he couldn't understand in the past were immediately integrated as soon as he reached the realm. How did I cultivate my yang spirit? It was exactly what Mr. Niwen Chinpu said in the 8th phase of the heavenly Jindan technique. The 8th phase of Huayuan is down, and the Zhou Xing is nourishing the baby. Sometimes the fire burns the Dan cave. Go deep into the cold spring to get the red turtle. To put it simply, it was the combination of the yin qi of the left kidney and the yang qi of the right kidney. How could he cultivate the jinshin? Li Yundong kept thinking about the ancient books he had read in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot, but he couldn't remember how to cultivate the jinshin for a while. He had asked Zi Yuan, but she had told him with a wry smile that even she didn't know. After cultivators reached such a realm, they could only slowly explore it by themselves. Li Jiandong thought for a while and couldn't help but think of the words engraved on the wall by the mystical silver fox in the stone room. He couldn't help but recite the elixir formula of the heavenly Jindan technique in his heart, especially the notes left at the end of the technique. These annotations said, ordinary people should practice the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th transformations to strengthen their physique and prevent common diseases. The 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th transformations are very difficult. Those who are not cultivators should be able to put aside worldly affairs and focus solely on cultivation. As for the 9th transformations, it is even more impossible for ordinary people. It requires an absolute treasure on an iceberg, requiring a special person to pluck it. Only then can one cultivate and touch upon it. But how could one cultivate the 9 transformations? Compared to the detailed cultivation method from the 1st cycle to the 8th cycle, Mr. Niwen Chinpu seemed to have made up his mind at the most crucial moment. He did not mention how to cultivate at all and only left behind a poem. The poem said, "The 9 cycles of carefree Tao fruit is complete, and 3,000 meritorious deeds become deities. Golden books and jade slips proclaim the imperial edict, and auspicious clouds soar to the 9th heaven." This poem was completely different from the previous 8 transformations poem. There was no mention of the cultivation method between the lines, only the result of cultivating to the 9 transformations. This made Li Jiandong very depressed, and he even speculated maliciously, could it be that Mr. Niwen Chinpu himself didn't cultivate to the 9th cycle, so he didn't write it down? Or is this the 9th cycle of his own imagination? Thinking of this, Li Jiandong couldn't help laughing in the spirit space. He quickly swept this idea out of his mind and quickly searched for the many ancient books he had read in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot. Although Li Jiandong had cultivated to the primary phase of the jinshin, after his encounter with Su Ling, he had clearly discovered the terrifying power and fatal flaws of the primary phase of the Jinshin phase. Although it was almost impossible for cultivators in the Yangshin phase or below to defeat a master of the Jinshin phase, it did not mean that the Jinshin phase was really invincible. The primary phase of the Jinshin phase, that unbreakable Jinshin, was not really invincible. Otherwise, Su Ling's protective Jinshin would not have been broken by the three top Yang spirit masters, Li Jiandong, Zheng Yuan, and Zi Yuan. Although Su Ling had gone berserk after that and beaten the three of them to the point that they could only fight back, it had also made Li Jiandong clearly realize that although the unbreakable Jinshin was strong, it was not invincible. Moreover, the unbreakable Jinshin seemed to only be strong but not soft. In other words, the Jinchi of the unbreakable Jinshin only had Yang Qi but lacked Yin Qi. As the saying goes, fighting is like using a weapon, and the art of war says, win by surprise. In terms of fighting, it means to overwhelm the opponent with strength and defeat the opponent with skill. In Li Jiandong's opinion, the so-called one person can defeat 10 people with strength was not absolute. Even if Su Ling had the strength of 10,000 kilograms, Zheng Yuan's Hell Wuzhang Enchanting Jade and Zi Yuan's Ninth Heaven Zi Yuan Silk added together could still compete with the opponent through ingenious moves and fighting skills. The reason for this was the softness, ingenuity, and the opponent's too simple Jinchi. The reason why the Yang spirit was stronger than the Yin spirit was that the condensation of energy of the Yang spirit was far stronger than that of the Yin spirit. The Yang spirit could absorb things and fight like a real body. On the other hand, the Yin spirit was just a weak mass of energy. Could only penetrate things but not pick them up. The reason why the Jinshin was stronger than the Yang spirit was that the degree of condensation of the Jinshin was several times that of the Yang spirit. Not only could it pick up things but it could also cover the body like armor, forming a hard protective shell. When a cultivator's Jinchi was condensed to a certain extent, their soul would undergo a qualitative change. The density of Jinchi would continue to increase, changing from the Yin spirit to the Yang spirit, and from the Yang spirit to the Jinshin. When it was condensed to the highest level, it would be able to challenge the power of heaven. Li Jiandong used to be very puzzled. Why is Su Ling's Jinshin so stiff and rigid? It only knows how to protect its whole body, but it can't change at will like the Yang spirit? According to Li Jiandong's speculation, if the Jinshin could change at will like the Yang spirit and transform into a sharp blade with the power of the unbreakable Jinshin, wouldn't it be invincible? Or if it changed into a shield, wouldn't it be impenetrable by any powerful magical weapon? The Jinshin was originally an extremely condensed Jinchi Yang spirit, but if it could change again and compress into a smaller object, wouldn't the density of the Yang spirit be even more terrifying? But when Li Jiandong cultivated to the primary phase of the Jinshin, he understood that it was not that Su Ling didn't want to change but that he couldn't. At this time, Li Jiandong felt as if his whole body was shrouded in a ball of flame, and his whole body was full of strong Yuan Yang Qi. It was as if he was on a flaming mountain. Although his whole body was full of strength, it was all the power of Yang without the slightest bit of Yin Qi. The primary phase of the Jinshin was like hard steel. No matter how the opponent beat it, it could not be broken, so it was called the unbreakable Jinshin. In a fight, if the Jinchi lacked softness, it was easy to lack stamina and only had the power of 3 axes. If the softness lacked hardness, it was easy to be unable to attack for a long time and be unable to settle the score with one strike. Li Jiandong felt the situation of his Jinchi at this time, and his heart couldn't help but move. He thought to himself, the human body is a self-sufficient small universe, and I have Yin and Yang Qi in my body. Although the Yin Qi in my body is different from the Shenin Qi in Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin's bodies, it should also be useful. Thinking of this, he suddenly remembered that when he had borrowed books in the school library, he had read some poems in Zhang Buduan's Wuzhen chapter. There were a few lines in the poem that said, dragon-shaking Mercury comes from the hometown, and Duahu Lead is born in the Canfeng. The two things are born because of the mother, and the 5 elements all go to the center. The moon was only half bright in the sky, and there was already the roar of dragons and tigers. Then he worked hard to cultivate, and in a day the Neguandan was formed. Hua Yu's male tiger roared, and Fusang's female dragon roared at the bottom of the sea. Granny Huang made a matchmaker and sent husband and wife to share one heart. Li Jiandong thought to himself, the meaning of these lines is exactly the cultivation method of the Yin-Yang 8 trigrams. There's nothing strange about it, but what does the last sentence mean? Is it implying that if cultivators want to go to a higher level, they have to send husband and wife to share one heart? Li Jiandong knew that Zhang Buduan's words originally meant that the yin and yang qi in the body were in line with the Tao of heaven and earth, but it was precisely because of this sentence that it also touched a chord in Li Jiandong's heart. Only when heaven and earth intersected could there be all things. Only when men and women were in harmony could there be babies. Only when the yin and yang qi of the human body intersected could there be Naiden. What would happen if the Jinshin, which was extremely masculine, intersected with the extremely feminine qi? Just as he was thinking of this, he suddenly heard a very soft voice coming from afar, as if someone was calling his name. Li Jiandong looked in the direction of the voice with his yang spirit body and saw Su Chan looking at him playfully in a corner of the cave. She was smiling sweetly and her beautiful eyes were full of anticipation. Li Jiandong immediately laughed and went over to her. He said softly with a smile, "Weren't you meditating in the next room? Why did you come out?" Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said in a low voice with some embarrassment, "I don't know how to cultivate after I reach 7 tails, so I came to ask you if you know." Li Jiandong saw that Su Chan's eyes were evasive, and her face was even redder. There seemed to be a touch of autumn water hidden in the corners of her eyes, and there was a shyness in her eyes that was unique to a young girl. His heart skipped a beat as if he already knew the answer. He said with a smile, "But I don't know either. What should I do?" There was a flash of disappointment in Su Chan's eyes. "Ah, you don't know either? Then what should we do?" Li Jiandong also said with a sad face, "Yes, what should we do?" Su Chan looked at Li Jiandong eagerly, as if she wanted to say something but hesitated. After a long time she said hesitantly, "I heard from my master that the best and fastest way to cultivate after the Jinshin phase is." Li Jiandong laughed in his heart and thought, "No wonder she's my girl. She thinks the same way as me. It turns out that she came to find me because she had the same idea as me?" But Li Jiandong deliberately pretended not to understand and said with a smile, "What is it? Tell me quickly." The look in Su Chan's eyes became more and more bashful, and her cheeks became redder and redder. The porcelain skin on her neck was so red that it looked like it was about to bleed. She lowered her head and bit her red lips. After a while, she seemed to have made up her mind about something. She suddenly raised her head and was about to say something embarrassing. But as soon as the girl raised her head, she saw Li Jiandong looking at her with a faint smile and a mischievous look in his eyes. All of a sudden, Su Chan's heart was as clear as a mirror. Her master knew everything. He was just teasing her. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.